Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving the county road because I needed to clear my head. It was late July, humid and noisy with crickets. My name is Marcus Hale. I grew up around these fields and knew the normal sounds: crickets, corn whispering, a dog barking for reasons nobody could explain. That night, something small and wrong threaded through the familiar. I turned by Miller's and the road narrowed between tall stalks. At the curve, a white beam was sweeping across the corn. It wasn't a car or a flashlight. It moved in perfect arcs, slow and exact, painting the field and then moving back. There was no sound, no motor, no hum. The beam had a hard edge, and when it passed the tops of the plants, they lifted and settled without wind. I stopped. The truck idled. I killed the radio because the night should be its own soundtrack. The light kept going, each sweep identical. I looked for a source at the field's edge. No parked truck, no trailer, no person. The more I searched, the less any ordinary explanation fit. I climbed the shoulder and stood where the gravel met the rows. Up close, the beam felt mechanical, too steady to be a handheld light. When it crossed the nearer stalks, the sound was wrong, less like wind and more like thick fabric rubbing. My skin tightened. Small, odd things started to collect. Mrs. Klein's porch light blinked once and came back. Their dog barked twice and stopped. The power lines gave a low, thin hum, like someone had turned the current down for a moment. My phone couldn't find a signal. The radio caught static and then went dead. Then I saw a shape deep in the field. At first it looked like a deer, but the silhouette stood unnaturally still between rows, and when the beam hit it, the outline was crisp and pale. It wasn't tall, maybe the size of a man, but its posture was wrong, tilted forward, unmoving. I wanted to call out, to test if it was a person, but my voice felt small. The sweep passed again and the shape was gone. No sound, no rustle, nothing. It was as if space had been left empty. Time fuzzed a little after that. My watch hands seemed to hesitate. The beam's arcs began to stutter like someone fidgeting with a dial. Then, without warning, the light blinked out. No fade, just nothing. After the beam died, the world seemed uneven. I knocked on Mrs. Klein's door and she said she had seen a flash and then her porch light had dipped for a beat. We walked to the field edge and found shallow, even impressions in the dirt where something had stepped in 3 or 4 inch intervals and then stopped 3 rows in. They weren't boot prints. They were flat and precise. Wind blurred the edges before I could study them long. I drove home and the town felt like it had gone on when I had stepped out of its rhythm. The news said nothing. Friends suggested surveyors or a film crew, and jokes about UFOs were muttered in the same breath as disbelief. But explanations that covered one detail left others exposed. No sound, no equipment, the hard stop of the light. A few nights later, I went back with binoculars. Through the glass, the beam looked like a clean slit. No spill, no halo. It moved the same way, and when it crossed the field, the corn bent in a circle near the middle, not flattened by wind or a machine, but leaning out from a center as if someone had stood and turned. There were no tracks leading in or out. I kept notes on my phone, times, small observations, because listing them felt like ordering a shape that didn't want to be ordered. A bakery clock ran fast for a day, a street lamp near the elevator flickered. A camera at the feed store returned a single frame of white where the night should have been black. None of that made a pattern more sensible. One morning after that, I started keeping a list. My photos that night had tiny mismatches, timestamps that shifted by a minute when I uploaded them, a triple frame where the beam left a pale bar, and my camera app called it motion blur. My truck clock ran slow for a week. Small mechanical things hiccuped and then fixed themselves. I told Javier, my friend from high school, and he came out with thermos coffee and a skepticism that was useful. We sat on the tailgate and watched the field. For an hour, nothing happened, and we talked like idiots about baseball stats. Then the beam started again, the same precise sweep. Javier's face lit in straight lines through the steam, and for a second I thought anything that exact couldn't be natural. Where the arc turned, the corn leaned away in a shallow bowl, like someone had stood there and spun. Word spread, and a handful of townsfolk came out with cheap cameras. The beam swept past them and seemed to avoid anyone standing in the road. One man with a hand spotlight walked the field edge, and the beam hesitated and then moved elsewhere. He told us he felt like something was watching him, which made his voice small. The sheriff's deputy came and wrote in the blotter, "Light observed, no source found." That line landed the way official language often does. Part comfort, part shrug. People mentioned survey crews and pranks. A neighbor running combines said maybe it was testing equipment. Each explanation fit a piece and left other pieces bare. Other small things happened that month. A county radio channel caught static that no one could locate. The feed store camera returned a single frame with a clean square of white where nothing should have been. Mrs. Klein's porch light dipped again. A barn door opened for a minute on a windless night, and a bakery clock ran fast for a day and then corrected itself. The events didn't form a pattern. They clustered like dust motes around the same corner of air. Once I followed the sweep down a lane behind the Miller place and found a combine idling with its lights off. No one was in the cab, and the machine smelled faintly of ozone. As I passed, my truck radio made a thin squeal, and then nothing. I left a note on the Miller's pickup, and they shrugged the next day. "Equipment hiccup," they said. Months went on. The beam returned now and then, always clean and silent, and sometimes a ring of flattened corn would appear where nothing could explain it. Harvest arrived, and the fields changed shape. The nights changed with them. Life rolled forward. Kids went back to school, the fair came, invoices were paid, and the town's chatter moved on. I stopped camping on the tailgate every night. I still looked at the fields when I drove by, longer than needed. The list in my phone gathered dust, but I kept the pictures. When I told the story to people, they either nodded politely or tried to laugh it off. Javier moved away for a job and said he hoped whatever it was had stayed behind. The beam never made a grand statement. It left small, precise hints and then let ordinary life recover them. That was the thing I kept returning to. The way everything snapped back as if nothing had happened. I came home each night, I slept, I went to work, but sometimes on a slow curve of road, I would slow the truck and look, and there would be a memory of light slicing the field in perfect arcs. Then the night would be ordinary again, and I would drive the rest of the way home. I was 12 when I decided to camp in my backyard. It was June, humid with the smell of cut grass and the faint fried oil drift from the diner on the corner. I wanted to sleep under the stars. My name's Nate. Dad bought the pop-up tent after I promised to mow the lawn twice. I rolled out the sleeping bag, put my flashlight on the picnic table, and left my phone on airplane mode because the battery was low and I didn't want it dying. The neighborhood was the usual: porch lights, a couple of cars passing, a radio muffled through an open window. I liked hearing those small sounds. They made things feel safe and normal. That night, though, small things felt off. The lamppost at the corner hiccuped and steadied like a hiccup in someone's voice. The crickets were quieter than I'd expected, more garden rustle than chorus. Mom's silhouette moved at the sink, and when I glanced toward her kitchen window, I thought for a second she was standing still with her hands in the water. It was only the way she rinsed plates. I lay on my back and watched the trees frame a slice of sky. Around 11:30, a wind came up for a minute and then stopped, and with it went the sound of a pack of distant dogs that usually bark near the train tracks. I told myself the sounds were normal in their absence. Someone drove by, the wind shifted, but it made me notice the night more closely, as if I had to choose what to pay attention to. Around midnight, my dog Scout woke me. He's a mutt with a bad back and a heart that runs loud. When he whined, I unzipped the tent and let him stretch. He settled on the porch step after a pretzel, and at first everything was ordinary. Then the barking started. Not one or two dogs, but a rolling chorus that came up all at once. Yaps, deep barks, a long howl that sounded like the mastiff 3 houses over. The sound pooled and pushed into the yard like wind. I scrambled up and grabbed the flashlight. My hands felt unusually clumsy. the strap digging into my wrist. Tom from across the street poked his head out of the garage and squinted up at the sky. A row of porch lights clicked on in sequence, as if someone was running past them with a switch. Mrs. Chang stood in her slippers, towel on her hair, and didn't go back in. "What is that?" she whispered. What struck me was how organized it sounded. Not random chaos, but a composition. Call and answer, clusters of voices, the small dogs answering the big ones. Under it all, there was another noise I couldn't place, a thin metallic tapping that came in slow, regular beats, like someone knocking a finger on a rail in the distance. It threaded through the barking and made the rhythm feel less natural. The contractor's temporary LED sign at the end of our block flashed 12:14 and then, for a second, flashed back to 12:13. It was an impossible little thing, but I noticed it the way you notice when the corner of a picture frame is slightly off. I felt the night tighten in my chest, like I was collecting moments that didn't fit together. I thought about going to get my mom, but Scout's ears were pinned forward and he wouldn't move from my side. The dogs kept yelling, and then, in the space of a breath, all of them stopped. Not a fade, an absolute cut. The street fell silent, the way a theater falls quiet when someone drops a line. Scout froze and looked toward the trees. For a second, the world sounded as if someone had pulled a blanket over it. High above the back fences, just where the tree line met the sky, a single point of light hung low. It didn't look like a plane, no blinking navigation lights, no wings. It wasn't the orange sodium of a street lamp. The glow had a bluish, pale center and a hazy rim. It was small enough that you could imagine holding it in the palm of your hand, but it was positioned too high for that. It was perfectly still, like a bead threaded on an invisible wire. People on the porches watched it the way you watch a TV scene that won't resolve. Tom muttered, "What the heck?" and Mrs. Chang's lips formed a whisper. The light didn't cast a beam or a shadow. The air around it seemed to soften, as if the night itself had blurred a little where the light sat. I had this sudden stupid hope that someone would say, "It's a drone," or "test lights," or even, "It's the streetlight on the corner," so the moment could be explained and folded back into the ordinary. My phone buzzed in my sleeping bag, though it was on airplane mode. I dug it out, and the screen flashed a blank white notification from a number I didn't recognize. The battery read 43% and dropped to 39 2 ticks later. A neighbor's microwave display, one of those clocks taped to the front of a garbage can, went dark for half a second and then came back with the wrong time. The small electronics acted as if they'd disturbed. I climbed on the picnic table to get a better vantage point. My flashlight beam lanced out toward the dot and washed the air, but it did nothing. The little halo remained constant. For a stretch that felt like forever and also like 2 heartbeats, I kept waiting for it to move, for something to happen that would make sense. It didn't. It simply hung there, quiet and precise. Then, as suddenly as the dogs had stopped, the light went out. Not a dimming, but a disappearance, the kind that makes you catch your breath because the night changes its name. Porch lights clicked off. People went inside. Tom closed his garage door. Scout nosed my hand, then curled under the picnic table and pretended sleep would solve anything. I stood in the yard for a long time, feeling small. In the morning, everything looked ordinary. The lawn had the same uneven stripes. The picnic table had the same chip of paint worn off the edge. Scout ate his breakfast like he'd never been late-night alert. My mom listened to what I told her over toast and coffee, and when I said I hadn't heard the thing come or go, she said what parents say, "Don't run off again at night," and then changed the subject to laundry. There was a stack of odd little follow-ups that made me sit up when I thought about the night. The local police station logged a handful of calls, dogs barking all over, and filed them under unusual events. A neighbor 2 streets over texted later to say his security camera had caught a glow, but the clip was grainy and only a few frames long. The feed store had a customer who swore their analog radio had gone to static at midnight, and when it cleared, there was a voice in the background that sounded like a man humming a tune through cotton. People talked in small circles and then went back to mowing and buying feed. I didn't sleep in the yard again after that summer. Scout got older and slower and liked the porch more than the grass. But every now and then, when the air is still and the night tastes faintly metallic after a storm, I walk down to the fence and look up at the tree line. The lamppost at the corner has been replaced since then, and the trees are thicker, but I slow at the corner and listen until the random sounds of the neighborhood return. TVs and kids and the distant rumble of a truck. Sometimes, years later, I tell parts of it over a beer or at family barbecues. My brother cracks jokes about aliens, my uncle says the countryside plays tricks. Mostly I keep the memory to myself. On still summer nights, I wander out to the fence and check the tree line. No dot hangs there now. Once, 3 summers after that night, a faint pale pinprick winked near a roofline and was gone before I could blink. The dogs a few houses over fussed for a moment, then fell silent, like someone had closed a book. The memory stays with me in the small, tight place under the ribs. No tidy answer. Just that hush and the image of Scout's ears forward and the world holding its breath. We drove out to the ridge because the sky was supposed to be stupidly clear that night. One of those forecasts you show off to people the next morning. My name's Noah. My friend Leah wanted to get away from the fluorescence in her studio, and I wanted to see if the Perseids were worth the fuss. We parked on the little gravel turnout past the old radio tower, the one that always throws a lonely beam of orange into the black. It was late August and still warm enough that the windows stayed down while we unloaded blankets. Everything started ordinary. We laid out the blankets, the thermos of cheap coffee, a bag of store-bought cookies. Leah had a notebook. She likes to draw the constellations she can't name. I had a pair of binoculars and an old star chart I'd taped into the dashboard because it makes me feel like I know what I'm looking at. Crickets were loud in the brush, a couple of moths kept hitting the car, the town in the valley had that soft glow in the horizon you expect. We lay back and let the sky fill us. A few minutes in, there was a small thing that felt off. A plane traced a line across the north and then vanished behind the stars like it had never existed. Leah nudged me, said she thought she saw it go gray at the edges before it disappeared. I joked about heat shimmer and she said no, like it was erased. I wrote that down. That was the first item on the list of things my memory tried to pin down afterward. We watched meteors. We pointed out bright ones and timed their streaks. At one point, the ham radio at the tower down the road started up, low and crackly. But when I reached for my phone to check the time, the screen froze on the home image and then jumped back 2 minutes. Leah saw it too. She said, "Either your phone's dying or your watch is fast." My wristwatch didn't move. The ham chatter was nothing important, someone testing antennas, but at 2 separate moments a thread of static crawled right through the conversation, like someone had tuned a needle across a record. Each time, the tower light blinked oddly, like it hiccuped in Morse code and then kept on. Those little weirdnesses stacked up and made me aware of how the night could collect small things and make them a shape. Leah pointed out a cluster we both usually ignore. A faint arc of stars that sits low near the east. She'd been trying to figure out if it was a remnant of the Milky Way or just smear from light pollution. We were hunched with our jackets pulled up and phones in airplane mode because we wanted to be offline. Neither of us had any intention of making a spectacle. Then the grid showed up. It was subtle at first. I glimpsed a thin, straight line of pale light running between 2 stars like someone had drawn a ruler under the sky. I thought maybe it was an airplane trail catching the light, but the line didn't fade or waver. It held. Leah said, "Do you see that?" And when I followed her finger, there were 2 lines now parallel, and then 4, spaced perfect, like a faint wire fence had been lifted and stitched across the stars. The lines were a white so soft they didn't hurt to look at, and they cut the constellations into little boxes, a map that had no business being up there. It looked as if someone had projected a grid on the sky and then dialed the opacity down to a whisper. We both sat up, Leah fumbled for her sketchbook, and I aimed the binoculars. The grid wasn't a couple of lines. It was an entire lattice, extending from horizon to horizon over the ridge, thin and exact. It held for a moment that felt like deep breath. Long enough to see the way Jupiter got bisected by a line, long enough for me to worry, because nothing about it fit with any sky mechanics I knew. There were no beams, no origin point, no projector on the ground. The air smelled the same, pine, a hint of the town's bakery, but the sound felt a degree thinner, like someone had turned down the bass. Leah tried to film it. Her phone camera hummed and produced a smear of static where the grid should have been, like the sensor couldn't render the lines. I tried to take a photo with my camera, a cheap DSLR, and when I looked at the preview, the frame was black where the grid had crossed. The stars behind it didn't show. It was as if the grid existed on a frequency our gear couldn't touch. We argued, quietly, about whether we were hallucinating. Both of us had been up late. Both of us had driven out without dinner. But while we were whispering, a second thing happened. The grid performed a soft flicker, like someone blipped a dimmer. When it flickered, a series of thin vertical lines brightened for an instant, and the star field behind them seemed to pulse outward, as if the net had made the stars ripple like a pond. It wasn't loud. It wasn't an explosion. It was a precise, faint modulation that left my skin crawling. The grid held for maybe 12 seconds if you make me score it, and then it dissolved. One frame there was the lattice. The next there was sky. No fade, no trail. The stars were where they'd always been. The ham radio chatter at the tower resumed, uninterested. The tower light stopped hiccuping. My phone's clock snapped back into sync. Both of us felt that tiny cold after silence that follows something sharp. We kept talking after the fact because you do. Saying things makes you feel less dizzy. Leah said, "It looked like a net," and I said, "Like someone ghost meshed the universe." We sat for a little while longer, making lists in our heads how it had no sound, how equipment couldn't capture it properly, how the grid's geometry had been too clean to be natural. There was the small, insistent thought that someone else must have seen it. Hikers on the trail, the tower guy. But none of that mattered in the immediate shape of the night. The ridge was our little world, and it had rearranged itself for a minute. When we got back to my truck, the car clock flashed the same time it always did. The radio was playing a country song, like nothing had happened. Leah wanted to drive back up the road to see if anyone was out, to find someone to corroborate it. I wanted the opposite. I wanted to get somewhere with other people, somewhere the sky felt ordinary again. We compromised and stopped at the only 24-hour diner on the route, or ordered 2 strong coffee, and stared at steam. Over our cups, we outlined possibilities in the low way people do. Projectors mounted on the tower, some promotional light show, some new art installation using drones, a trick of the eyes. Leah's hands shook a little as she traced the grid on the napkin. The diner TV showed nothing about it. The late crowd were truck drivers talking about weather, a woman at the counter knitting, the usual slow life. None of them mentioned anything when we went to wash our mugs, and I found myself feeling slightly foolish, like someone who'd seen a mirage and had been trying to pin it down with receipts. The next day, I emailed the ham club at the tower, a little careful. "Hey, were you all testing anything late last night?" A terse reply came back from a call sign I didn't recognize. "No tests scheduled. Tower on routine maintenance. Nothing reported." Leah posted a short clip of her video, the one that had the static smear, and a few friends sent back half-jokes about compression artifacts. An online astronomy forum teased out a few ideas. Camera sensor overload, digital sampling aliasing, the brain filling in missing data. Reasonable answers. None of them explained the way my hand had felt when the grid brightened, like something small and precise had reached past the stars and touched the space by my ribs. A week later, we drove back to the ridge, more curious than afraid. The sky was a tangle of clouds that night, and we got bored and left early. But sometimes now, on a random Tuesday when the city is loud and the streetlights look the way streetlights always do, I look up from a sidewalk and imagine a faint mesh laid over the sky. I wonder if grids are something you can project only for people who have 2 things: enough darkness and someone to watch with. Leah and I talk about it less often than we used to. When we do, it's in a careful way, like mentioning a storm that wasn't altogether a storm. There are nights I catch myself opening the camera and pointing it where the sky is clearest, half expecting the sensors to refuse me again. Mostly they behave. Stars, a planet, a satellite. ordinary. But every so often, when the corner of my eye catches a straight line of cloud or a contrail hangs suspiciously tidy, my breath goes a little thin, and I turn my head, waiting to see if something very precise and impossible will lay a net across the sky, just for a moment, and then be gone. I'd driven out to Silver Pine Lake late one summer evening, after finishing a double shift at the hospital. I was the kind of person who needed water to clear my head, and the lake was maybe an hour from my apartment in Spokane, tucked away behind a stretch of pine and fir that blocked most of the road noise. The sun had set an hour or so earlier, and the sky was a deep indigo, scattered with stars that reflected faintly on the calm surface of the lake. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I parked at the small gravel lot and grabbed my backpack. Inside was a thermos of cold coffee, a notebook, and a small flashlight. I wanted to walk down to the shore, maybe sit for a while, scribble some notes, just let my brain stop running. The lot was empty, which wasn't unusual. Most people left at sunset. Even the campground a mile down the road looked dark. The walk to the water was quiet. Pine needles underfoot, the occasional rustle of a raccoon or something small moving through the brush. No breeze, just still air. When I reached the shore, I dropped my bag and sat on a flat rock, letting my legs dangle over the water. I took a sip of coffee, tried to let the exhaustion wash off me, and stared out over the lake. That's when I noticed it. A faint glow from the water, directly in front of me. Not reflected moonlight, there was no moon, but something underneath the surface. A soft, white-green luminescence, moving slowly. The strange part was that the water itself didn't ripple in any way I could see. It wasn't like something was breaking the surface. Instead, ripples radiated outward in perfect concentric circles, as if the water itself was vibrating or pulsing with the light. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, trying to make sense of it. I squinted, thinking it was some kind of algae, or maybe a reflection from a distant campsite light. But there were no lights, and nothing along the shoreline. Just trees, rocks, and water. The ripples spread in a hypnotic rhythm, slow and steady. I reached into my backpack for my flashlight. I didn't want to shine it directly at the glow at first, more just to get my bearings. When I switched it on and pointed toward the water, the glow dimmed. I lifted the beam higher, scanning the tree line, then back at the lake. The light had intensified again, brighter than before, now forming a small dome that seemed to rise just beneath the surface. I swallowed hard, because this wasn't natural, not in any way I recognized. The glow moved upward, slowly at first, a perfect sphere lifting out of the lake. Water slipped off it in smooth arcs, but it didn't splash or disturb the surface around it. The ripples continued, radiating out from the spot it had emerged. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my voice felt frozen. I fumbled for my phone, saw the screen light up, then realized there was no signal. It didn't matter. Even if I could call, who would believe me? The sphere rose straight up, silent, perfectly round, smooth edges. It passed above the tree line, and I could make out its faint glow against the starry sky. I blinked, thinking it might vanish if I looked away, but it stayed, drifting slowly upward. I could hear nothing. No birds, no wind, no insects. Just the occasional lap of water against the shore, though the ripples weren't from anything physical. They were emanating from the lake in steady waves that the sphere seemed to carry with it. I watched until it disappeared into the night sky, growing smaller as it rose, until the last glimmer faded and the stars above returned to normal. The water calmed immediately, the ripples fading as if nothing had disturbed it. I stayed seated for a long time, unsure whether to move or just sit. My coffee had gone cold. Eventually, I packed up and walked back to my car, ears straining for the smallest sound, hands still shaking a little. The forest was alive with normal sounds again, crickets, a distant owl, but the lake behind me remained dark and still. Driving back to Spokane, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. No lights, no spheres, just the road stretching straight through the dark. The radio came on, low static at first, then clear music. Nothing unusual happened. When I got home, I checked the weather radar and lake reports. No reports of bioluminescence, no unusual activity. Nothing that could explain what I saw. Even now, I can't explain it. I told a few friends, but most just shrugged. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that spot, not at night. But part of me keeps thinking about that sphere, rising silently from the water, and the perfect impossible ripples it left behind. It was a sharp, metallic clicking that woke me. One loud, precise clack against the window frame that sounded nothing like the usual neighborhood noises. My phone said 2 a.m. when I thumbed the screen and then went dark. The screen had no notifications, but the house felt wrong in a way I couldn't place. I sat up and listened. The clicking came again. 2 quick taps, evenly spaced, like someone testing the latch on the neighbor's shed. June, my tabby, uncurled and flattened herself against my chest, eyes 2 tiny moons in the dark. She didn't hiss or bolt, just stayed still and tense. That sealed it for me. Whatever it was, whatever noise had come from outside, the cat felt it too. I pulled the blinds aside an inch and looked down. The street was almost empty, a couple of parked cars, street lamp 3 houses down throwing the usual pool of sodium orange, the silhouette of Mrs. Duval's maple at the corner. But there was a pale light hanging in the air, about 8 feet above the asphalt, maybe 30 feet from the sidewalk. It wasn't a streetlight or a porch light, it was softer, like a phone screen held at arm's length, bluish white with no obvious source. For a second, I thought someone was balancing a lantern, but there was no movement to indicate a hand, no cord. It hovered there, motionless, and when it pulsed, dim, bright, dim, the porch light across the way answered in the same rhythm. Not a blink, more like a slow breath. I watched my own porch light through the window and could see the filament inside the bulb dim in time with the hovering glow. I don't know what made me do it, muscle memory or a foolish sort of courage. I stepped to the door, thumbed the deadbolt open, and cracked it so the screen door pushed on the chain. The glow didn't waver when I moved. Instead, it slid sideways, very gently, and drifted behind the neighbor's house. It vanished from sight as easily as if someone had turned a page. At that exact moment, my porch light steadied. The pulsing stopped like someone had snapped a switch back into place. The world felt small and focused in that second, like everything had been centered around that one motion. I left the door chained and walked down the steps to the sidewalk. The air was colder than it had been when I went to bed, a tight, clean cold that sat in my lungs. The street smelled faintly of wet asphalt and the sour of someone who'd cooked fish for dinner. It was quiet, and the quiet felt like a separate thing, one you could hear, thick enough to press at your eardrums. From the sidewalk, I could see where the light had been. Nothing. No mark, no smoke, no reflector on the pavement. Just a darker patch between 2 headlights. When I looked back up, the sky was full of stars. No drones, no planes, no blinking aircraft lights. Just the small constellation over my house and the heavy presence of the maple. I stood there for a long time, waiting for some refund of the sound. The clicking, the hush, anything. But the night gave me only my own breathing and the distant hum of an AC unit 3 houses over. I went back inside and closed the door, undoing the chain. The lock made the sort of small clack that suddenly sounded very loud. June stayed clamped to my lap like she was part of me. I turned every light on in the living room, not because I thought it would do anything, but because not doing anything felt like inviting more of whatever it was. The house looked ordinary in the harsh, full light. Books on the shelf, 2 mugs in the sink, the calendar still showing the month. Nothing seemed altered. I wanted to tell someone. I opened my phone, thumbed at messages, then realized my cellular bars were gone. Not missing a bar or 2, no bars at all. The time on my phone still read 2:03 a.m., though the minutes ticked forward. I tried the landline in the kitchen and got dead air, the kind that says either the line is down or the world has decided to be quiet on purpose. The radio on the counter, my cheap one, the one I used for late-night storm listening, had a thin hiss where music should be. When I flipped through the stations, the hiss stayed the same and then cut to silence. Not a fade, just gone. I could have gone outside again. I almost went outside again. Then I remembered the click at the window. It had been an odd, mechanical sound, precise as a metronome. It occurred to me that whatever had been out there had known I was awake. More than that, it had known where I could see it. That feeling lodged itself behind my ribs and wouldn't leave. I lay on the couch and tried to make the night ordinary by reading. I read the same paragraph 3 times until my eyes blurred, then turned the page and tried again. The clock by the TV said 2:26. The house settled with tiny creaks that made sense, pipes shifting, wood contracting. But every so often, I would check the window and angle my head to the street like a person watching a pot they're not sure if it's boiling. Around 3:10 a.m., the metallic clicking came again. This time it wasn't at the window, but from the eaves above the driveway, a rapid staccato like someone tapping 2 metal spoons together. June bolted off my lap and ran to the hallway, pressing herself against the screen door as if she could slide through and be closer to whatever was outside. I went to the back door. The motion sensor light above flicked on and then off. The sensor didn't stay on. That would have been too easy. Instead, there was one short flash and then nothing. I watched the backyard for a long time. There was nothing there but my compost bin and the honeysuckle. The grass was still. My neighbor's window blinds were drawn. Every house on the block seemed asleep. The clicking stopped. The porch light stayed steady. The world sighed and folded in on itself like a hand closing. When morning came, I did not move from the couch until light spilled from the blinds into the living room. The house felt normal in the daytime, the same way it does after a hard rain. Everything clean but slightly changed, edges a little sharper. I opened the front door and walked the yard, looking for a sign. I checked the maple's trunk, the sidewalk, and the strip of lawn between my house and the street. Nothing. No scorch marks, no dents, nothing to say something had hung there in the night. The only unusual thing I found was a small circular patch of pavement where the asphalt seemed slightly cleaner, like someone had wiped it. It could have been anything, an oil drip that had been washed, a spot where a car's headlights had shone, but it sat in the middle of the road where no car had parked. I took a photo, not because I thought it would prove anything, but because taking a photo made me feel like I had done something concrete. That day, people in my neighborhood went to work, kids took buses, the barista at the corner store still put too much sugar in my latte when I stopped on my way to the hospital. No one mentioned a glow in the street at 2 a.m., which wasn't surprising. I didn't bring it up either. You don't tell strangers about things that might mark you as the person who sees the things other people don't. I half expected to see a news story, strange light in suburban street. But nothing came of it. At night, I found myself stupidly staring at the window. I closed the blinds before I could get to the point of going outside again. I tightened the chain on the door and left the hall light on. June slept on the end of the bed. When I moved in the night, she opened one eye and then turned over. A few nights later, the porch light flickered for no reason I could identify. I told myself it was a faulty bulb, and I changed it the next afternoon. My phone recovered its bars and the landline worked. The world resumed its usual small failures: a clogged sink, a missed delivery. I went back to work, to the routines that make days feel anchored. But every time a metallic sound hit the house, a guttering pipe during a storm, a neighbor's ladder against vinyl siding, I flinched like someone who still remembers a gunshot. And sometimes, walking in the dark from my car to the front door, I paused at the curb and looked up the street, waiting for a bluish pinprick to hang itself in the air and for the porch lights to breathe in time with it. The street was always quiet and ordinary. Once, for a moment, the porch light at Mrs. Duval's house dimmed, and I swear my heart did the same thing the light had done. A little skipping beat, waiting for the rest of the world to follow. I never saw the light again. I learned to not stand at the threshold in the small hours, to lock the door twice if the house felt too still. I washed the mugs until they were clean enough to see my face in them and went to sleep with the blanket pulled up to my chin. The clicking sound lived in the memory of that night like a loose coin in a pocket. One you feel but can't fit into the palm. An absence that was also a presence. It happened about 6 years ago, late summer, on a stretch of highway between Twin Falls and Jackpot. I was heading back to Boise after visiting an old friend who'd moved down to Nevada. It was past midnight, clear sky, no clouds, no moon, just that huge empty desert around you on all sides. Traffic was light, one of those drives where you pass the same handful of cars over and over again because everybody's doing the same speed. There was a dark blue Chevy Silverado that kept leapfrogging me, a red Corolla with a missing hubcap, and a couple semis farther back. That was pretty much it. I remember glancing at the clock around 12:45. I had the radio low, just trying to keep myself alert. Out of nowhere, my headlights dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed like someone had put a tinted screen over them. The dashboard lights followed. The engine gave a low stutter, like when you're about to stall out in first gear. I thought it was just me until I noticed the red Corolla ahead of me, rolling slower, then drifting to the shoulder. The Silverado's brake lights came on, then faded as if the whole truck was losing juice. Both cars coasted to a stop. My engine coughed once, and then silence. No radio, no headlights, nothing. It was eerie how quickly the whole road went dark. 1 second, you've got beams of light cutting through the desert. The next, it's just pitch black. The only sound was gravel crunching under my tires as I steered to the shoulder. I sat there gripping the wheel, waiting for the engine to kick back, but it stayed dead. I tried the key a couple times. Nothing. No click, no turnover. That's when I noticed it. Over the highway, maybe 150 feet up, there was a shape hanging in the air. At first I thought it was a cloud catching starlight, but the sky was totally clear. It wasn't solid exactly, but it wasn't formless either. A kind of pale oval, glowing faintly, just suspended there like it was pinned to the sky. It didn't move, didn't pulse, didn't make a sound. I opened my door and stepped out. The desert was dead quiet, no crickets, no wind. Just me and the faint crunch of gravel under my boots. The other drivers were getting out too. The guy from the Corolla leaned against his door, looking up. The Silverado driver, a tall guy in a baseball cap, stood in the middle of the road with his arms crossed like he was trying to act unbothered. One of the semis had rolled to a stop a little farther back, and I could see the driver's flashlight beam sweeping around his cab. Nobody said anything at first. We all just stared at that thing. I kept expecting to hear some kind of hum or engine noise, but there was nothing. It just hung there. And the longer I looked at it, the harder it was to pin down its shape. Some moments it looked circular, other moments stretched out, like it shifted when you weren't directly focusing on it. After a while, could have been 30 seconds, could have been 10 minutes, I honestly couldn't tell, the oval began to move. Not fast, just a slow, smooth drift off to the west over the desert. Still no sound, still glowing faintly. We all watched as it slipped farther away until it was just a dim smudge against the stars, and then gone. The moment it disappeared, my headlights snapped back on. The radio came alive mid-song. The Corolla's taillights lit up again. The Silverado rumbled as its engine restarted. It was almost too much at once, like every car had been waiting for the same cue. The guy in the baseball cap muttered something I couldn't catch, got back in his truck, and pulled onto the road like nothing happened. The Corolla followed. The semi behind us roared back to life. Nobody waved, nobody talked, everyone just drove off. I sat there a minute longer, letting my hands stop shaking before I pulled back onto the highway. The strangest part was how normal the drive felt afterward. No more flickering, no more stalling, just empty road and the stars above. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that glow again, but the sky stayed clear. When I got home, I realized I couldn't account for how long I'd been stopped. The trip should have put me back in Boise around 3. I didn't walk in my door until after 4:30. I've never run into anything like it since. I was hiking alone in the Uintas that weekend. Late September, weather already starting to cool off, with patches of yellow aspens scattered through the darker evergreens. I'd driven out from Salt Lake early that morning and planned to make camp a few miles past Ruth Lake, just a quick overnight to clear my head before the work week. The forecast was clear skies and highs in the 60s during the day, dipping close to freezing at night. I kept to the trail for most of the afternoon, but just before sunset I wandered off a bit, following a game path that cut toward a ridge overlooking a small basin. I wanted to find a spot with a decent view to eat my dinner and maybe watch the stars come out. It wasn't anything technical, just some scrambling over loose rock and dry pine needles, but it left me breathing hard by the time I reached a flat shelf about halfway up. I dropped my pack, pulled out a thermos of coffee, and set my compass on a nearby boulder so I could double check which direction the ridge actually faced. The idea was to orient myself and maybe note where the trail was in case I lost light faster than expected. That's when it started. The compass needle spun. Not quick at first, just a twitch, like maybe the metal in the boulder was throwing it off. But then it kept turning, slow circles, wobbling like it couldn't settle. I picked it up, thinking maybe I'd set it on something magnetic, but even in my hand, the needle drifted aimlessly, one direction, then another, never pointing north. I remember laughing under my breath because I thought it was broken. I tapped the glass with my finger. The needle jumped, spun again, and then whipped a full circle, back and forth like it was confused. I crouched there for maybe a minute, just staring at it. For some reason, I looked up. Above the ridge line, maybe a quarter mile ahead of me, a bright light was hanging in the sky. White at first glance, but if I stared too long, there were faint hints of green around the edges. It wasn't flickering like a plane, and it wasn't moving. Just stuck there, like someone had pinned it in place above the tree line. The forest was dead quiet. Even the breeze that had been moving through the aspens earlier had stopped. I realized how loud my own breathing sounded. I looked back at the compass. The needle had settled, perfectly steady, pointing north again like nothing had happened. When I looked back up, the light was still there. I told myself it was a helicopter, though I couldn't hear rotors, and it never shifted or tilted the way helicopters do when they hover. I watched it for what felt like a long time, waiting for it to blink or fade. Instead, it slid sideways, smooth, no sound, and stopped again. Not a wide movement, maybe the length of 2 trees across my vision, but it was too clean to be anything I recognized. I sat down hard on the boulder. My legs felt unsteady. I checked my watch, 6:47 p.m. I looked again at the light. Still there. I pulled my phone out of my pack to take a picture. No service, but I figured at least the camera would catch something. When I raised it, the screen froze in a solid gray wash. No sky, no ridge, no light, just a blank, foggy square. I lowered it, looked with my own eyes. Light still there. Raised the phone again. Gray. That's when I got spooked enough to pack up. I shoved the compass and my phone into my jacket pocket, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started back toward the main trail. I kept looking behind me every few steps. The light didn't follow, but it stayed exactly where it was, fixed over the ridge like it was waiting. By the time I reached the real trail, dusk had come on. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the air felt colder than it should have that early in the evening. I walked fast, almost jogged, but every time I crested a rise, I glanced back. The light was visible above the trees until the path curved enough that the ridge blocked it. Once it was out of sight, the sounds of the forest came back all at once. A raven croaked somewhere above, branches shifted with wind, and I could hear the stream I'd crossed earlier. It was like flipping a switch. I reached the spot I'd planned to camp, but I couldn't make myself stop. I just kept walking, headlamp bouncing over the rocks, until I was nearly back at the trailhead. I ended up unrolling my sleeping bag in the back of my car. In the morning, the compass worked fine. Phone camera worked fine too. I even took a picture of the same ridge in daylight. No issue at all. The whole hike should have been 3 hours in, 2 hours out. But when I checked the clock in my car, it was past 1 a.m. I don't remember sitting that long on the ridge. It didn't feel like more than 20 minutes. I drove home the next day. I haven't been back to that basin since. I was sitting at the end of the pier with my line dropped in the water, watching the horizon more than the bobber. It was late September, one of those damp nights where the mist sits low over the bay and every wooden board under you feels swollen with salt. The tide had been slack for an hour, hardly any bite, but I wasn't in a hurry. Nights like that were about the quiet as much as the catch. The moon was supposed to be near full, and I kept glancing east, waiting for it to lift out of the water. Around 9:30, I saw the glow come up. First, just a pale haze on the horizon, then a round edge pushing through the mist. I remember thinking it looked bigger than usual, like one of those so-called supermoons people always post about. I leaned back on the bench and watched it climb. The reflection laid a wide silver path over the water that shimmered with every ripple. Everything about it looked normal, until another glow began rising just a few fingers to the right of it. At first, I thought I was seeing double, like maybe my eyes were tired. I rubbed them, blinked, even swapped the rod to my other hand and squinted. But the second glow kept growing, and soon another round edge appeared. It was smaller, but identical. A second moon. I said out loud, "No way," though there was no one around to hear me. The smaller one hung there for a while, level with the real moon. My first thought was that it might be some weird atmospheric reflection, but it wasn't hazy or distorted. It had the same sharp edges, the same white glow, like someone had cloned the real thing and pasted it beside it. The reflection in the water didn't match up either. The real moon stretched a long trail across the bay, but the smaller one didn't cast anything at all. Then it wobbled. Not the way clouds move across the face of the moon, not like heat shimmer. The whole disk shifted side to side, just slightly, like a coin held at the end of a string. My stomach tightened watching it. I thought about how no natural thing I'd ever seen in the sky moved like that. After a minute or two of that wobble, the smaller one started climbing fast, way faster than the real moon. It rose in this straight, deliberate path, like something had decided it was done pretending. It cut through the mist and went up until it hit a layer of low clouds. The glow lit the underside for a second, like a lantern pressed to fabric, and then it vanished inside. The real moon stayed where it was, steady, normal, like none of it had happened. I just sat there on the bench, hands sweaty on the cork handle of my rod. The bay felt wrong. The water was calm, but had this dull heaviness to it, like it was waiting. The silence hit me next. The gulls that usually cried from the pilings were gone, and even the water lapping against the pier sounded muted. I reeled in my lines slow. The bobber was still out there, unmoving, but I couldn't keep my eyes off the clouds where the smaller moon had gone in. I thought I saw a faint white glow shifting behind them, but it was hard to tell with the mist. Every time I convinced myself it was gone, there'd be another faint pulse of light deep in the cloud cover, like something moving around up there. I don't know how long I stayed, but the damp started to sink into my clothes. I finally packed my gear, but when I went to stand, the wood under me vibrated faintly. Not like a wave hit the pilings, but a steady tremor, almost like the hum of an idling engine somewhere deep below. It stopped as soon as I noticed it. Walking back down the pier, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The real moon was climbing slow and steady, the way it should, but the sky felt off. When I reached the shore and stepped onto the gravel, I realized my watch was 9 minutes behind the phone in my pocket. I couldn't figure how both would disagree when they'd always matched before. At home, I tried to tell myself it had been some kind of illusion, maybe the way mist refracts light, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The reflection in the water, the way it moved, it didn't fit. For a few nights after that, I made excuses to walk down to the pier late, even when I wasn't fishing. I kept looking for the same glow, but the moon came up alone, ordinary. Still, every time a cloud shifted across it, I caught myself waiting for another disk to slide out and join it. One night in early October, I was out there again, and the air was dead calm. Around 10, a pale light flashed once behind a bank of clouds on the horizon, quick and sharp, not like lightning. It was in the same spot I'd seen the second moon appear. Nothing followed, but I stood at the edge of the pier for half an hour just listening before heading back. I never saw the second moon again, but sometimes when the real one climbs over the bay, I catch myself watching the right-hand edge of the horizon, waiting to see if something else will rise with it. I pulled into the gravel drive of the house on County Road 7, eased the van into park and killed the engine, and the world felt like it did when you stop a lawnmower and notice how quiet everything suddenly is. It was one of those late summer evenings that held the heat from the road, but the air around the trees cooled. and the farmhouse sat back from the road under a row of maples with lamps on the porch and a single floodlight on the barn. I hadn't been to this place before. The GPS had routed me down a cut I didn't know, and the lane had more potholes than it claimed. My scanner chirped my delivery ID, and I thumbed open the rear doors. As soon as I stepped out the van, a porch light hiccuped. Bright, dim, bright, like somebody tapping the switch. I thought it was the bulb, so I figured I'd ring the bell and move along, but then the barn light did the same thing in exact rhythm, and the small lantern from the mailbox followed. It looked stupidly choreographed. Porch, barn, mailbox, porch again, each one wobbling like a slow heartbeat. The air smelled of cut hay and gasoline, the ordinary farm smells, but the lights made everything look like a hangover. I slung a package over my shoulder and walked up the cracked concrete path. The house was dark otherwise. The kitchen curtains were drawn, no TV glow leaking out. The dog in the yard, a big brindle thing, was at the fence the way farm dogs are, nose over the top rail, and it barked at me like it was going to chew the air. Its bark stopped dead when I was 7 feet from the gate, like someone had pinched the dog's noise. The sudden silence made me check the radio. The handheld scanner I keep in the cab, the one that usually grumbles with dispatch chatter, had gone from a background mumble to nothing. No static, no signal. My phone, which had been holding 2 bars the whole route, slid to 0 bars right when I glanced at it. The van's clock blinked from 9:17 to 9:14 for a second and then righted itself. Little things, stupid little things, enough to make my mind tidy them into some reasonable explanation. I knocked. No answer. The package was a fold of tarp and some replacement parts, heavy enough that I was glad I'd parked close. I stepped back to the mailbox, and the lights went steady again, like nothing had happened. The porch light came on full, the barn flood shone like noon, and the mailbox lamp stopped its breathless waver. The dog started barking again. My scanner snapped back to life as if somebody had pressed mute. I told myself it had been a power surge, old wiring, a load issue, and I laughed at myself for looking up at the sky like an idiot. I wasn't looking up before I noticed it. I was supposed to be delivering, to leave a slip if no one answered, to get the next stop done before the late window closed. But when the lights steadied, a small unease nudged my shoulder, and I glanced up toward the line of black cloud that usually sat over the ridgeline behind the barn. There was a pale glow moving slowly across that band of sky. It wasn't like the usual things. No flashing plane marker, no headlamp, no sodium streetlight glow. It was softer and more of a whitish blue than the bulbs on the barn, and it drifted with the kind of deliberate slowness you don't associate with anything mechanical. Imagine someone dragging a dim flashlight across a sheet of black velvet, only there was no beam, just the source of light sliding like a bead on a wire. The glow carved a sparse ribbon over the treetops and stayed straight, not bobbing with wind, not darting like a bird. For a second, I thought it might be the neighbor's house down the road, some porch light angled into the clouds, something I could point to and say, okay, normal. But the more I watched, the less normal it seemed. The glow moved with the kind of calm a slow tide has, and there was no sound. Not a hum, not the faint whine of a helicopter rotors, nothing. The dog at the fence sat down and put its head over its paws like it had been told to do a trick. Being a delivery driver teaches you to notice patterns, what dogs do when someone approaches, which porches have motion sensors, which bores of houses are occupied at dinner time. Nothing in my training fit this. I took out my phone to snap a picture, useless habit, a way to anchor the moment, but the camera balked. The screen flickered a thin gray smear and then the app closed. I tried again and the shutter icon spun, and then the image that saved was just a dark frame with a smudge where the light had been. I turned my head away and counted under my breath, some ridiculous attempt at timekeeping. 3, 4, 5. When I glanced back, the porch light was steady, the barn flood steady, the mailbox lamp steady. The glow was gone, no trace in the sky. The swath of clouds above the ridge looked like it had always looked, a smear of gray. The dog nosed the grass and then started barking at the van again, as if frustrated he'd lost a target. I left the parcel in the usual place and taped the delivery notice to the door. The keys jangled a little in my hand. My palms had that clammy sweat feel like before an exam. I walked back to the van looking over my shoulder, thinking maybe someone was set up in those trees with some show equipment, some prank. But the tree line held no lanterns, no silhouettes, just bare branches. Driving away, I tried to make ordinary sense of it. Clogged transformers and old wiring could explain the lights, I told myself. Electronics can glitch, cameras fail, dogs bark weird. But the thing that kept snagging was how everything stopped together. The radio, the phone signal, the dogs barking, then resumed like a conductor lifting a baton. My scanner recorded the delivery window in a log I could check at the end of the night. The software timestamp showed a gap of exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds between the door open command and door closed. I swore I had been at the porch maybe 20 seconds, which meant I couldn't rely on my internal clock as evidence. 2 stops later, at a house with a mailbox full of campaign flyers, the streetlight along the lane buzzed and went out for a beat. My van's dash camera, the one I keep running more for insurance than anything else, had a single frame of static at 9:22 where the sky should have been, and then the feed resumed with normal footage. It was a minute detail and the kind of thing you shrug at until you don't. On the radio, dispatch asked if anyone had seen weird skylights around the county line. 2 other drivers said they'd seen something bright and slow over the reservoir half an hour earlier, then changed the subject to traffic. Nobody asked any more questions than the polite minimum. I finished my route and made the last delivery just as the highway lights came on. The county road back to the depot had longer stretches of dark than I liked at night, and I kept my speed slow because that section of road eats tires if you snooze. In the cab, the van was the usual smell of fast food and coffee grounds. The dash clock read 9:50, and the radio hummed a country song I didn't like. I called dispatch to say I was headed in, and the voice at the other end was level and flat and said, "You good?" Like I had just asked a weather question. I said I was, then added, "Did you hear anything about flickering lights?" And he said, "Yeah, called it in from a couple places. Transformer guys said nothing on their end. You're not the only one." At home, I sat at the kitchen table in the exhausted post-shift state, where you let your problems be the size of dishes. My wife came in from the back porch with a grocery bag and didn't look at me funny when I asked, "Do you ever notice the lights around here acting up?" She put the bag down and said no, not since the storm last month, and asked why. I told her, slowly, because the more I tried to pin it with words, the less sure I sounded, about the porch that hiccuped, the dog going quiet, the pale thing over the ridge. She dried her hands and said, "Maybe it's just some art students doing a projection for the festival," which is the most reasonable sounding suggestion I could imagine. I wanted to say I tried to take a photo and couldn't, that my scanner had lost its mind for 2 minutes, that the van's dash cam had a single frame of nothing. Instead I said, "Maybe," and drank too much coffee. The next morning I checked the log on my scanner again, and the dash cam's footage in better light. The frame of static was still there. The time gap at the house was still 2 minutes and 37 seconds. The deputy who takes weather reports was in the lot at the depot in his coffee jacket, and he told me, in the way lawmen do, that a farmer near the reservoir said his cows had gone to the fence and wouldn't come back in, and his wife swore the animals were acting funny. Hank at the garage said he'd watched a feed store webcam clip sent from a kid down the road where the sky looked like it had a streak of pale smoke across it for a beat. Everyone had a version and nobody had proof. Months have gone by and the county didn't declare a strange sky emergency. People kept working. We replaced a bad transformer on the east line and filed the footage under anomalous artifact. The simple rhythm of the route resumed. Maps, packages, signatures. I don't stand in the road and stare at the tree line anymore. That first night sat somewhere behind my chest like a loose tooth. It'll get me awake sometimes, thinking of the way the porch light had breathed and how the glow crawled slow and exact across the clouds. I ran the dash cam footage through a filter once and got a smear where the pale thing had been, and a lot of software errors that could mean anything at all. When I drive past that house now, the porch lights are always steady, the barn light obedient, the mailbox lamp dull and practical. The dog at the fence, I've seen it on early routes, wags like every other dog. I deliver to that road every couple of weeks. I always glance up to the ridge on my way in, stupidly, like checking whether something wants to be seen. So far, nothing appears. But sometimes at night, when it's hot and the itch of insects is thick on the windows and the whole world is the hum of the refrigerator, I catch myself listening for that odd heartbeat of light, waiting to see if the night will stop and then start again. I was on my way home from a late shift at the plant, the kind of drive where your eyes are too tired to focus and the road becomes a stripe you follow without thinking. It was a clear, late summer night, warm enough that I had the window cracked, smelling the cut alfalfa from the fields. The highway was the 2-lane that runs between small towns. No lights for most of the drive, just my headlights and whatever passed for sky out there. I had the radio on, the usual background noise. I was half listening to a late-night talk show, half counting mile markers. About 30 minutes into the stretch where the trees lean in and the road narrows, the signal dropped into a wash of static and then started scanning. It was doing that thing some car radios do when you press scan. It flipped through stations, but not with the normal pause. It skimmed like a thumb over the buttons. Whoa, FM, AM, hiss. Other voices, hiss. Something in a language I couldn't place. Static again. And right on, dozens of channels in a second. No stop, like someone was fast-forwarding a stack of tapes. I hit the scan button to stop it. The knob clunked under my thumb and the display flashed a frequency that meant nothing. The radio kept skimming. I pinched the edge of the wheel and hit the power. Dead silence for a second, then the scan started again, faster. I laughed at myself, small, surprised, because a radio glitch is a radio glitch and you reset, or you pull over and call someone, or you ignore it. I kept driving, hitting the knob more deliberately, turning volume up and down like that would change anything. The sound was a strange, rolling thing. Brief bits of music, a ghost of an ad, a foreign announcement, and then white noise, then something that sounded like a choir recorded through a tin can. It didn't make sense. A breeze pushed in, carrying the sweet green scent of the fields. The truck felt normal. Engine steady, tires humming on the pavement. The dash clock blinked 2:13. For the first odd thing I tried to blame on being tired, the digital numbers flipped a little, then returned. When the radio finally settled, as if someone had let go of the scan button, the station that came in first was a clear local country station, and the DJ was talking like nothing miraculous had just happened. The minute the voice came through, I felt the hair on my arms go flat. I noticed something else then. The right side headlight seemed dimmer than the left. I slowed and pulled off on the gravel shoulder under a stand of young cottonwoods. The night there was almost black, the fields folding away in a darker black. I cut the engine and sat looking at the hood, listening to the cooling metal. The radio, on my dashboard, crawled through stations again, only this time it did it when the engine was off. The scan sound became an animal in the silence, sharp, quick, impossible to place. I got out and walked a few steps to the road edge. No one else was around. No distant tractor, no headlights. The trucks and cars I'd passed earlier weren't here. The highway was empty. The cottonwoods were still. Even the usual rustle sounded diminished. My phone sat on the passenger seat with one bar of signal and the little no service note blinking like it was trying to tell me something was wrong. When I looked up, I saw a light above the tree line, maybe 100 yards ahead and 30-40 feet up. At first, it was just a soft white, like a lantern hung too high, but as I watched, the shape pulled itself together. It wasn't a point. It took form as 3 bright points that were connected, the spacing exact. So my mind read it as a triangle before I could name the geometry of it. The edges between the points glowed faintly, like someone had sketched a triangle and filled the outline with light. It hung there, motionless over the middle of the lane. There were 100 small ways I tried to make the sight normal. Maybe it was a reflection from my own dash bouncing off the windshield. Maybe a banner drone used by advertisers had gotten off course. Maybe a low-flying crop duster with lights out. I squinted, turned my head this way and that. The object didn't have strobe lights. It didn't blink in the way helicopters do. It was steady, deliberate. It blocked stars. There was no engine sound, no whir of rotors. The night folded around it in a quiet that felt too complete. I stepped closer to the truck because standing beside a vehicle feels safer than standing between it and the dark. My skin prickled with the kind of uncertainty you get when an animal watches you from the brush. The triangle rotated, almost imperceptibly, as if testing an angle. Its light threw cut shadows under the cottonwoods, clean and sharp like ink. That was the weird part. The light was bright enough to carve, but not bright enough to hurt your eyes. It was precise. The radio in the truck, with the engine still shut off, began to skitter again. I watched the display and watched the triangle. The frequencies flipped faster than I could read them. For a brief second, the voice of the DJ from earlier came through, warped and slowed, like his words were moving through honey. Then whatever was on the dial, static, music, speech, folded into silence. The exact moment the sound died, the triangle dipped a fraction on one point, then lifted straight up in a single smooth move and slowed. It didn't accelerate like a rocket. It rose, steady as a hand lifting an object small against the sky, and as it climbed, the edges softened. Then it was just a brighter smudge against the backdrop of stars until it faded and was gone. The radio flicked back to the country station mid-sentence. The DJ's voice was right where it had left off, as if the interruption had been nothing more than a pause on a cassette. The minute the music resumed, my right headlight popped back on proper. The truck's clock, which had jittered earlier, sat where it had always sat. Everything in the cab fell into routine as if some kind of pause button had been released. People do odd things in the middle of nowhere at night, I reminded myself of that. But the way the light had moved, so soft, so deliberate, and the way the radio stopped and started like that, didn't fit with normal. I tried to tell myself I had misjudged distance, misread the movement, that the triangle had been small and close or huge and distant, that it had been a trick of atmospheric refraction and a glitchy radio. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands in my lap, the truck cooling around me. My heart was still beating faster than it should have, but it wasn't a panic. It was more like the aftertaste of a dream that didn't want to fade. I checked my phone. Service was back, 1 bar steady. I restarted the engine and drove on slowly, the road unrolling in a plain ribbon before me. The plants in the field bent away from the shoulder in the night breeze. The stars were where stars should be. I didn't tell anyone that week. There wasn't a next morning paper story, no traffic reports about strange lights. At work, we talked about quotas and the canteen coffee, and then weeded out the conversation to everyday things. The oddness of the night sat with me in the back of my head like a pebble in a shoe. Some nights after that, I found myself driving that stretch again, slower than I had reason to be, eyes hunting the tree line. Most of the time, there was nothing but sky and the occasional blink of a plane far off. Once, about a month later, I thought I saw 3 points of light aligned again, just past the bend. But when I squinted, the headlights of a pickup slipped into my mirror and the lights went away, like they'd been nothing more than a trick the dark had pulled. I made it home that night and every night after. My life resumed its small, sane rhythms. The plant, the meals, the neighbor's dog that liked to wait under my porch. But sometimes, when the radio in the truck skims a little and a station catches on the edge of clarity, my fingers search for the scan button before I remember. It works fine now. I reach for it and let the song play, and for a second the night opens up into that very still space again, where a triangle of light might hang over the road and the world hushes itself until it chooses to speak. I woke up to this low humming that made the window panes shake. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a passing truck. This was a deep vibration that seemed to come from inside the walls. The sound was steady, like one long note, and it carried through the bedframe into my chest. I sat up and looked at the clock. 2:41 a.m. The first thing I noticed after that was the trees. My bedroom looks out over the backyard, and beyond that, a thick stretch of pines. The tops were thrashing around like it was a storm, but when I opened the window, I didn't feel even the slightest breeze. The air was still and heavy, and the night smelled like warm dirt. I just sat there, listening. The humming held for maybe 20 seconds, then changed pitch slightly, like someone sliding a finger along a glass rim, and then it cut off mid-note. Just gone, like somebody hit a switch. No fade out. The silence that followed felt wrong. Not peaceful, but staged, like the world had paused. I waited, staring out at the trees. The branches were still moving, even though the air stayed dead calm. They kept swaying for maybe a minute after the sound stopped, and then gradually slowed. The silence didn't lift, though. I realized I couldn't hear the crickets that usually scream all night out here. No frogs either. Nothing. I went downstairs and stepped onto the porch. Gravel crunched under my feet, but it was the only sound. Even the small creek behind the yard sounded muffled, like a faucet half turned off. My dog, June, usually follows me, but she stayed under the table in the kitchen, head on her paws, not moving. Then the humming started again, softer this time, almost more like a vibration than a sound. The window glass on the porch door buzzed against the frame. My teeth even seemed to catch it. The trees swayed again in that strange, uneven way, not like wind, but like a pulse moving through them. I looked up, thinking maybe a plane or a helicopter was overhead, but the sky was blank. No lights, no movement. I walked out into the yard a little, holding my phone up like an idiot, even though I knew the camera wouldn't catch much. I didn't want to look at the screen too long. It felt like if I took my eyes off the trees, I'd miss something. The humming held steady for a long stretch, maybe a full minute, then jumped to a higher pitch that made my chest tighten. And then it stopped again, dead silent. I don't know why, but in that moment, I was sure something was looking at me. The yard was empty, the tree line dark, but I had the strongest sense of being observed. Not like an animal. Different. The silence made it feel like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. I backed up to the porch. That's when I noticed June had crawled under the table completely, that pressed flat to the floor. She made a low whine when I shut the door and locked it. I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room with the lamp on, listening. Around 4 a.m., I heard what sounded like branches snapping out by the tree line. Not loud cracks, but little, deliberate snaps spaced apart, like someone moving carefully through the woods. I pulled the curtains back, just enough to peek out. Nothing. But the snapping went on for a while. When the sun finally came up, the sound stopped. The birds started up again, one at a time, almost cautious. I went out back, half expecting to see storm damage, but the trees looked normal. No broken branches, no debris in the yard. The grass was wet with dew, untouched. The only thing out of place was the dirt near the tree line. It was loose, like it had been disturbed, and there were impressions. Not footprints exactly, but shallow oval shapes pressed in a pattern that didn't make sense. They weren't deep enough to be human, and they weren't round like deer. Just flat, wide marks in uneven intervals. I didn't take pictures. I can't explain why. I just wanted to go back inside. That whole day, I felt tired and disoriented, like I hadn't slept in days. Electronics in the house acted strange, too. My kitchen clock was 5 minutes behind the wall clock in the living room, even though they'd always stayed in sync before. My phone glitched when I tried to open the weather app. It just froze for 10 seconds before updating. That night, when I finally tried to sleep, I kept the blinds shut tight. Around 2 in the morning, I woke again, not to the humming this time, but to silence. The same kind of heavy, staged silence as before. I held still, not even breathing hard, waiting. The humming never came back, but the silence lasted almost half an hour before the crickets slowly started up again. Since then, nights feel different out here. Some evenings are normal, bugs, frogs, the usual noise. But once in a while, I'll wake up, and the house will feel too quiet. The air will feel too still. I'll check the trees, and even if they're not moving, I'll get that same sensation like I'm being watched. I've thought about moving, but that doesn't feel like it would matter. Whatever that was, I don't think it's about the house. I think it was about me being awake at the wrong time, noticing. And every time the silence returns, I can't shake the feeling that it's not finished. I was on the little cedar porch of the rental cabin, lying back on the sun-worn Adirondack and watching the sky like it mattered. It was late August. The ocean smelled of warmed kelp and a low fog had parked on the point. The town behind me had mostly drifted to sleep. one grocery sign, a porch light 2 houses over. I had driven up that afternoon to get away and do nothing, which is what I was doing until a single point of light started pulsing. It didn't blink like a plane. It didn't flicker like some stars do. It brightened and dimmed slowly, 5 or 6 seconds between each change, like someone turning a dimmer. The rest of the sky hung steady. I watched because I couldn't not. At first, I tried a list of ordinary explanations: a test buoy, a pilot on a weird route, some optical thing with the fog. Every explanation covered some parts and left others exposed. A gull came and landed on the railing and left without a cry. The wind stopped for a minute. My phone showed no messages. I had the odd sensation of missing a small beat of time, like when a conversation skips a line and you realize you've missed a sentence. It was nothing you could prove later, just a feeling, but it made the night feel thin. After a while, the pulsing light moved. Not arcing, not bobbing. It cut across the sky in a perfectly straight line, as if someone had drawn it with a ruler. It did not wobble. It did not trail. I watched it move, and it felt impossible, like watching a cursor sweep. Then it stopped dead above the water, between the end of the point and the horizon. For a moment, I thought of buoys again, maybe a testing LED, but buoys are low. This was higher, hanging over where the horizon turned to nothing. Then it vanished like someone flipped a switch. It was 1 second there, and the next it was not. No fade, no scatter. The patch of sky where it had been felt strangely hollow. I laughed, a short sound that did not go anywhere. I told myself I had been staring too long. Maybe that was true, maybe not. After the light went out, small things happened in a string that made the night feel rearranged. The cheap AM radio I had left in the truck clicked on with a thin hiss and then died. The porch light 2 houses down blinked when it shouldn't have. A street lamp flickered like it had a loose filament. When I went down the dune path, I found shallow footprints in the sand that were not mine. Too light for a person, not quite like a dog. They started near the cliff and stopped at the grass, like whoever left them decided not to cross the beach. I crouched and ran my hand along the edge. The sand felt cool and held the shape. I took a picture because that was what you did with odd things. The timestamp on the photo read 3 minutes and 13 seconds after the time I remembered the light vanishing, which was the sort of detail that made me angle my memory against the clock and find the edges mismatched. At the tide line, the water sounded ordinary. The sky above the bay was ordinary stars again. No boat lights, no movement. The prints at my feet had no return trail. Standing there, I felt watched in a way that was less animal and more patient, like someone had walked into a room, looked around, and left the light on. On the walk back, the post light by the road blinked in an irregular rhythm. My truck was where I'd left it, but when I opened the door, there was a metallic smell like ozone, clean and sharp the way air smelled after lightning. My phone said I had been gone 7 minutes. The clock in the truck was a few seconds slow. The GPS took an extra beat to find a signal. A deer stepped onto the road and stood like it had been told to evaluate me. It turned and walked away without the usual leap. I drove back into town with the radio quiet and my hands tight on the wheel. People were out in small numbers. An old man sweeping outside the hardware, a woman walking her dog, a kid coming in from a bus stop. When I mentioned the light to the man sweeping, he nodded and said he had seen something low over the harbor. Then he shrugged as if to say, there wasn't much else to say. The woman with the dog told me her dog had refused to cross a certain lamppost and had started shaking for a minute, though there was nothing there to see. I slept badly in the cabin. I kept waking and looking through the blinds. Once I heard a fishing engine across the bay cut out completely with no sputter, then start again after a minute. The boat's log later mentioned a brief outage and nothing more. Morning scraped everything clean. The fog thinned, the tide erased most of the prints, and the town slid back into routine. The little radio in the truck was exactly where I had left it, off. My phone loaded the usual messages and the battery read normal. Still, the oddness clung the way dust clings. You can sweep it away, but some of it finds a new corner. On the ferry back, I tried to line up explanations in my head. Optical fatigue, a new harbor light, a pilot on a weird route. Each explanation took some pieces and left others exposed. If it had been a simple thing, it would have stayed simple. It didn't. Back in the city, I half expected someone to post about it on a local page, or for the harbor office to say there had been a test. Nothing showed up. The harbor office told me no buoys had been placed or tested that night. A fisherman mentioned in passing that he had seen a flicker and shrugged. A police log contained a short report from a passing driver who wrote that a bright point moved funny, but the handwriting and the two-sentence entry read like someone trying to describe a dream. For a couple of weeks, I found myself looking up at odd hours. Sometimes the sky was as it always had been. Twice more, I saw something like that first night. A single point pulsing slow and even, moving in an exact straight line, stopping, and then vanishing like someone flipped a switch. The motions were small and precise. Once one of those points crossed directly over a low ridge, and a separate, faint blink answered from a valley where there had not been anything before. Another time, a handful of lights drifted low over the harbor mouth and then folded away with the same exactness. Life around me kept its usual friction. My neighbor's kid learned to ride his bike. The corner store replaced a broken window. The ferry adjusted its seasonal schedule. People joked at work about glitches and ghosts. I chose not to make a big thing of it. The town tolerated small oddities, an appliance failing, a dog refusing a porch, a block with a minute of power outage. That had been how the world handled this sort of thing. Little holes opened and other little things slipped in. After the ferry docked, I drove to the harbor office and asked in person. The woman behind the counter looked at me with the politeness you give someone who is part embarrassed and part sincere. She checked a logbook, flipped through some sticky notes, and said there were no new markers and no scheduled tests. She mentioned quietly that the radar had a blip they could not explain for a minute, and that it was probably electrical interference. The way she said it made me think she did not expect a full explanation either. A couple of nights later, I borrowed a pair of binoculars from the hardware and sat on the point into the cold, watching the harbor mouth. The fog rolled in and out, and once a small, steady glow rose from the water and stayed put for a while, pulsing slow as before. Through the glass, it was just a thin disk of light, no flickers, no color change, the kind of thing that looked like a cutout against the sky. I watched it until my shoulders ached. When it moved, the motion was exact and clean. When it stopped like someone had pressed pause. When it went, the light left the space empty, as though nothing had ever filled it. Over the following weeks, the odd things were small and separate. A bakery clock ran a few seconds fast for several days and then corrected itself. A neighbor's wall clock froze for an hour and then resumed. Street cameras showed a momentary band of static in one shot and nothing in the next. An online weather cam produced a single frame where the sky held a bright, steady point, and the next frame showed only normal stars. None of those things linked up into a tidy pattern. They hovered around, being notable, and then moved back into the ordinary. Still, sometimes when I walked home and the air carried that heavy salt smell, I stopped and looked. There were nights when every star behaved and the world felt orderly. Then there were nights when a light breathed on the horizon, sliced across the sky in a straight line, paused without warning, and went out as neatly as if a hand had reached in and turned it off. I stood and watched those moments until the light was gone, and then I walked home. I was jogging after sunset, later than usual because I'd worked a long shift at the shop. It was one of those early spring evenings where the air is still cold enough that your breath fogs, but the ground has thawed and the smell of wet dirt and pine needles is everywhere. The trail I use cuts through a wooded stretch behind a subdivision and then opens into a long field before looping back toward town. It was quiet except for my shoes on the packed gravel. No cars nearby, no dogs barking. The kind of silence that makes you notice the rhythm of your breathing. I had headphones in but no music playing, just using them to keep my ears warm. That's probably the only reason I noticed what I did. As I broke out of the trees and hit the field, I saw 3 lights above the tree line across from me. At first I thought they were distant aircraft, maybe a formation. But the thing was, they weren't moving independently. They were in a perfect line, equidistant, all the same size and brightness. White, not blinking, not shifting, just hanging there. I slowed down to a jog walk without even realizing it. The lights didn't move for a long moment, maybe 20 seconds. Then, all at once, the whole line rotated. Not like planes banking, but like they were fixed to a rod and the entire rod spun 90 degrees. They stayed perfectly aligned while they did it. Then they rotated back, slower this time, like testing the motion. I remember my first thought was some kind of drone stunt, but there was no sound, not a buzz, not a hum. The night carried everything. If a branch snapped on the other side of the field, I could hear it. For something that bright, that high, to move like that without a sound, it didn't fit. I stood there in the middle of the field, sweat cooling on my back, watching them. The lights shifted again, tilting slightly, then flattening out like they were adjusting. Then, without warning, they shot straight up into the sky. No buildup, no acceleration, just still to gone in a blink, like the gap between frames in a film. One instant they were there, the next they were higher than I could follow, swallowed by the dark. The field felt emptier after that. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like when you walk into a room and know someone has just left. This sense of space being wrong. I realized I was standing in silence so deep it made my ears ring. I started walking again, trying to calm down. My watch said I'd been stopped for less than 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The trail looped back into the woods, and that's when I noticed the forest wasn't making noise anymore. No crickets, no owls. Even the wind had died. I picked up the pace, but the air felt heavier, like every step took more effort. At one point I swore I saw a faint white glow flicker through the branches ahead of me, off the trail, just for a second. I froze, waiting for it to come back, but there was nothing. When I finally got back to the subdivision edge, the normal sounds came rushing back. Cars on the distant highway, a dog barking, somebody's TV muffled through an open window. It was like stepping from one world back into another. I ran the last stretch home faster than I usually would, heart pounding. Not because of the workout, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still above me, watching. When I got inside, my phone clock was 2 minutes behind the microwave clock in the kitchen. Both had always been synced before. I don't know if that meant anything. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 3 lights in a perfect line, rotating as if they were one solid thing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else on that trail saw them, but no one has ever mentioned it, and I haven't asked. Now, whenever I jog that route, I can't help looking up at the tree line when I come out of the woods. Most nights it's just sky and stars. But I keep half expecting to see those 3 lights again, waiting in formation. I was making tea when I noticed the porch light acting strange. I keep the kitchen blinds open at night, just so I can see out across the yard, and the glow from the porch usually spills into the window. That night, it wasn't steady. It was dimming and brightening in this slow, almost steady rhythm, like somebody was twisting the dimmer switch back and forth. Only I don't have a dimmer switch. It's just a regular on-off bulb. At first I thought maybe it was loose. Sometimes the wind rattles the fixture and the bulb will blink out if it's not screwed in all the way. But this wasn't flickering. It was deliberate. Dim, bright, dim, bright. Each cycle lasted maybe 2 seconds, like it was breathing. I set the mug down and stepped into the front hall. The light still pulsed through the frosted glass in the door. I unlocked it and leaned out, expecting maybe to see the bulb about to go or some weird wiring issue. Instead, I saw this thing above the street. It looked like a ball of light just hanging there, maybe 20 feet off the ground, almost centered above the asphalt. It wasn't blinding, but bright enough that I could see it glowing against the night air. Not a street lamp glow, not yellow or white, but kind of a soft bluish tint, like the color of a TV screen when the signal cuts out. I froze with the door half open, my bare feet on the threshold. The orb just hovered, dead still. The porch light kept pulsing behind me. I turned halfway back, and sure enough, it dimmed when the orb brightened, and brightened when the orb dimmed, like they were synced. I felt a weird pressure in my chest, not painful, just heavy, like standing at the bottom of a swimming pool. Across the street, nobody was outside. Most of the houses were dark, except for 1 or 2 living room lamps. It was quiet. No cars passing, no dogs barking. Just me, the hum of the porch light, and that glowing ball. Then it started to move. It didn't shoot off or anything dramatic. It just drifted, slow and steady, gliding down the street without sound. It moved like it was weightless, like a balloon might if you pushed it on a windless night. Only there was no string, no swaying, just straight, level motion. I stepped onto the porch without meaning to. My hands were cold. The orb floated maybe 30 feet farther, then angled slightly left and slid behind my neighbor's house, disappearing from view. As soon as it was gone, the porch light snapped steady again. No more pulsing, just a regular, solid glow. I stood there listening, expecting, I don't know, something. Maybe footsteps or the sound of a car engine kicking over. Instead, it was dead silent. I thought about going inside and locking the door, but instead I stayed there, watching my neighbor's yard. Their house was dark, both cars in the driveway, no sign of anyone awake. The orb hadn't come out the other side. I waited, hugging my arms around myself, counting seconds. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Nothing. Finally, I decided to check the bulb, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I reached up and touched it. It was hot, like normal. The fixture was solid, no loose wires, no buzzing. That should have been enough for me to go back inside, but I couldn't shake the image of that light slipping behind the neighbor's house. So I went back in, grabbed my sneakers, and came out again, this time heading down the steps. The air felt heavier the closer I got to the street. It wasn't windy, but it felt like the air was thick somehow, pressing against me. My skin prickled like static. I slowed at the curb and just stood there, looking toward the backyard of the neighbor's place where the orb had gone. Nothing, just the shadow of their house and the tops of the trees behind it. I strained to listen. I thought I heard a faint hum, high-pitched like electronics whining, but it could have been my imagination. I stayed until I couldn't stand it anymore. I felt too exposed in the middle of the street, like something might come around the corner at any second. I backed up slowly to my porch and went inside, locking the door this time. I kept the blinds open, though. I wanted to see if the light came back. For the next half hour, I stood in the hall, peeking out. The porch light held steady. The street stayed empty. Around 10, a car finally drove past and everything looked normal again. I made the tea I'd abandoned earlier, but I didn't drink it. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the window. When I finally went to bed, I left the porch light on. It never pulsed again. But every time I looked out at the street that week, I expected to see that bluish glow hanging there, waiting for me to open the door. I pulled into the Sinclair station off Route 40 a little after 9 at night. It had been raining earlier, and everything still looked wet, the blacktop reflecting the overhead lamps, the smell of damp concrete in the air. The station itself was almost empty. Just one other car parked off to the side, nobody at the pumps. I took the first open spot near the middle row and killed the engine. The lot was quiet except for the buzzing of the lights above and the hum of the refrigerators inside the store. I got out, swiping my card at the pump, and that's when it happened. The screen in front of me flickered, like when an old TV loses signal. Not a normal card declined type glitch, but full static, black and white snow filling the little rectangle. I frowned, and as I reached out to touch the cancel button, I noticed every other pump screen had done the same thing. 8 pumps lined in 2 rows, all glowing static. It lit the whole station in this weird shifting light. I turned in a circle to take it in, and that's when I caught movement above. Directly overhead, just beyond the glare of the lamps, something metallic slid across the sky. It was silent. No engine, no chopping like a helicopter. Just this smooth silver shape gliding slowly, almost like it was using the station lights to hide its outline. The edges caught reflections, sharp, mirror-like gleams as it passed right over me. I couldn't make out a clear shape. It wasn't a plane, though. Too low, too close. And it wasn't a balloon. It didn't bob or drift. It just moved, steady, deliberate. I froze, hands still hovering over the pump keypad, watching it glide. It couldn't have been more than a couple 100 feet up, and I remember the strangest part. No sound. A bird flapping overhead would have made more noise than that thing. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes like maybe it was just glare playing tricks. When I looked back, the pumps were normal again. All the screens were back to the regular insert card or press pay inside. My screen had reset too. If I hadn't been staring right at them seconds before, I'd have thought nothing happened. But when I tilted my head back up, the sky was empty. Whatever I'd seen was gone. I stood there for what felt like too long, not moving, waiting for it to come back into view. I even stepped out from under the canopy to check the horizon. Nothing. Just damp, black sky and the faint glow of the highway in the distance. I went through the motions after that. Put the nozzle in, swiped my card again. My hand shook a little. I couldn't stop glancing up between each beep of the machine. While the tank filled, I tried to distract myself by looking around the lot. The other car I'd seen earlier was gone. I hadn't even heard it leave. The store was empty too. No clerk visible at the counter, though the lights were all on. I debated going inside, but couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed. Like if I stepped out of view of the pumps, I'd miss something important, or something would be waiting when I came back out. I kept scanning the sky. A few clouds hung low, but no stars, no planes. Just blank, wet night. The pump clicked off, startling me more than it should have. I shoved the nozzle back in its holder, not even checking if I topped off. I just wanted to be back in the car. When I slid behind the wheel, I locked the doors without thinking. I sat there a moment, both hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the reflection of the canopy lights shimmer on my hood. My rearview mirror showed nothing but the empty lot behind me. I forced myself to glance back at the pumps one more time before pulling out. Every screen glowed steady and normal, like nothing had ever happened. Driving away down Route 40, I kept checking the mirrors. Not for cars, but for the sky above the car, like I expected to see something silver drifting in the reflection. My radio crackled faintly a few miles later, just static for 2 or 3 seconds before the music came back. I didn't stop again that night. I drove the full 90 minutes home on half a tank, just to avoid pulling into another station. Even now, every time I swipe my card at a pump, I catch myself glancing up, half expecting the screens to flicker again and the sky to open above me. I was on a late-night flight from Denver to Seattle, one of those cheap one-way tickets I'd booked last minute because my boss sent me to cover a training session the next morning. It was winter, mid-January, and the flight had been delayed almost 2 hours, so by the time we finally took off, it was close to midnight. Everyone on the plane seemed exhausted. A lot of people were already dozing with headphones on before we even hit cruising altitude. I had the window seat about halfway back on the left side of the plane, just over the wing. I usually don't like that spot because the engine blocks the view, but at night there isn't much to see anyway. The cabin lights had been dimmed, just the soft glow of a few reading lamps here and there, and outside was nothing but black sky with a scattering of stars. About 40 minutes into the flight, I noticed something strange in the corner of my vision. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the wing light against the window, but it didn't move when I shifted my head. I pressed closer to the glass. There was a shape outside, just beyond the edge of the wing. It wasn't lit up, not like a plane would be, but it was darker than the night sky around it. That's the best way I can describe it, like a cutout, blotting out the stars behind it. I could make out lines, sharp ones, forming a triangle. Not equilateral, more elongated, like an arrowhead. At first I assumed it was another plane flying parallel with us, but there were no blinking lights, no navigation markers, nothing to indicate it was an aircraft. And it was too close. Way too close. I leaned forward, trying not to draw attention, and squinted through the window. The triangle kept pace with us, completely steady, almost like it was tethered to the wing. I could see the edges of it shifting slightly against the stars whenever we hit turbulence, but otherwise it stayed locked in place. Nobody else seemed to notice. The woman in the aisle seat next to me had an eye mask on. The man between us was asleep, his head against the tray table. Across the aisle, 2 teenagers were watching something on a phone. I wanted to tap someone and point it out, but I couldn't get a word out. The triangle tilted. Slowly, like it was banking, but it didn't change altitude or speed. It just rotated, giving me a clearer sense of its shape. Definitely 3 points, with the leading edge longer than the sides. It looked huge, much larger than the wing itself, though it was impossible to tell the exact distance. My stomach turned. I kept expecting the captain to come over the intercom, make some announcement about another aircraft, turbulence, anything. But the speakers stayed silent. I glanced down at the aisle, half expecting a flight attendant to walk past, but none did. Everyone remained calm, asleep, unaware. It felt wrong, like I was the only person awake to see it. When I looked back out the window, the shape was still there, keeping pace with us. Then, without warning, it began to descend. Not a sharp drop, just a slow glide downward, slipping beneath the wing until I lost sight of it in the clouds. The moment it vanished, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My chest hurt, and I forced myself to exhale. I waited, staring out into the dark, expecting it to reappear, but the sky was empty. The clouds below were thick and faintly lit by the moon, but nothing moved. The stars above were clear again. I sat back in my seat, my heart pounding. Nobody else reacted. Nobody stirred. It was like it hadn't happened at all. A few minutes later, the seatbelt sign dinged and the captain spoke, his voice calm, routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through a patch of rough air, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." That was it. Nothing about another plane. Nothing unusual. The rest of the flight dragged. I couldn't relax, couldn't close my eyes. I kept staring out the window, waiting to see the triangle again, but the sky stayed empty. When we finally landed in Seattle, the passengers stretched, yawned, grabbed their bags. Everyone looked normal, like it had been an ordinary flight. I thought about saying something to the man next to me, asking if he'd seen anything, but the words caught in my throat. I walked off the plane, through the terminal, into the cold night air, carrying the image of that dark shape pacing alongside us, sharp edges cutting through the stars, until it slid out of sight below the clouds. We'd camped plenty of times in that same spot before, so nothing about the night felt out of the ordinary when we first set up. It was early September, and the four of us, me, my cousin Alex, and two friends from work, Greg and Michael, drove out to this clearing just off a service road in the Cascades. The weather was clear, a little chilly once the sun went down, but perfect for a fire. We'd arrived around dusk, pitched 2 tents, and started a fire in the little rock ring we always used. It burned steady for a few hours while we cooked hot dogs and talked. I remember checking my watch a little before midnight. The fire had died down a lot, just coals and a few flickers, and we poured a water bottle over it to be safe. Greg even stirred the ashes with a stick until it was just damp gray sludge. We went to bed after that. No drinks left, nothing else to do. I slept hard at first, but something woke me around 3 or 4 in the morning. I couldn't tell what it was, no sound, no movement, just that half-alert feeling where your brain pulls you out of sleep for no reason. I lay there listening. The forest was quiet, maybe too quiet, but not in a dramatic way. Just no wind, no crickets, nothing. Then I noticed light outside the tent. Not firelight, but a pale, shifting glow. My first thought was that Alex had gotten up and restarted the fire. I unzipped the flap a couple inches. The fire ring was glowing. Not with flames, but like it had been reignited somehow. Thin smoke curled from the ashes, even though I knew for a fact we'd soaked them. The glow wasn't orange like normal firelight either. It was whiter, flatter, like embers under glass. I pushed the flap open wider. That's when I saw it. Above the tree line, maybe 100 feet up, there was a dim circular light moving slow. It wasn't bright like a spotlight, more like a foggy halo. It made no noise, just glided above the pines in a steady loop, almost like it was tracing a circle around our clearing. I froze, staring at it, waiting for the others to stir. Nobody did. I wanted to whisper Alex's name, but couldn't make a sound. The light kept circling. Every time it passed above the fire pit, the coals pulsed brighter, then dimmed again as it moved on. It felt deliberate, like the two things were linked somehow. I finally whispered, "Alex." He grunted, rolled over, but didn't wake. I whispered louder, this time at Greg, who was in the other tent. Nothing. I turned back just as the glow made one last pass, slowed, then drifted off beyond the trees. It didn't accelerate, didn't shoot away, just faded until I couldn't see it. The moment it disappeared, the fire pit went dark too, smoke still hanging over it like a blanket. I sat there for a long time, knees pulled up, staring at the dead ashes. I didn't dare go outside. Eventually, I must have dozed again, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the tent fabric. I unzipped the flap and stepped out. The fire pit looked wrong. The ashes had hardened into a perfect ring, clean around the inside edge of the stones, like someone had poured plaster and let it dry. In the middle, there was almost nothing, just a thin dusting, no coals, no wood chunks. None of us had touched it. When I told the others what I'd seen, they didn't know what to say. Greg joked about sleepwalking, but then he saw the fire pit himself and shut up. Michael poked it with a stick and said it looked sifted, like somebody had cleaned it. The strangest part, none of them remembered hearing or seeing anything in the night, not even when I unzipped the tent. Alex swore he didn't move an inch after falling asleep. We broke camp by mid-morning. On the way back to the car, Greg stopped and pointed at a spot just off the trail. The pine needles were flattened in a circle, maybe 10 feet wide. Perfectly round, no burn marks, no footprints, just pressed flat. Nobody said much on the drive home. I was sitting on the low stone wall behind my building, phone in hand, because the sky finally did that thing it does in October, where the whole horizon goes orange and then a violet that looks painted. I'd had a long day at the gallery. Opening night, people who said they loved your work, and then somewhere between the wine and the taxi, they didn't call back. And the pause between shift and sleep felt like something I needed. My name's Hannah Torres. I live in a 3-flat that backs onto the old quarry, and that ledge is the only place on my block where you can actually see the sun disappear without a neon sign cutting the view. It was dry and cold, the kind of evening where your breath fogs for a second and then it's gone. I propped my elbows on my knees and held the phone up, filming because the light was honest, and I liked the way it made the city look like it belonged to no one. Two of my neighbors, Dara and Len, stood by the stairwell talking about the show. Good impressions, bad lighting choices, whether Ben from PR was actually complimenting them or angling for invites. I kept the camera rolling because it felt easier than answering. A couple of odd little things happened before the thing in the video. First, the pigeons that usually roost on the rooftop across the alley were gone. The ledge that is always full of them was empty, as if someone had taken them down. I joked about it to Dara, and she shrugged, says, maybe the hawk finally got its act together. Len said nothing. He just scanned the sky like he expected something to be different. The alley smelled like gutter and apples, the normal late city smell, but everything felt quieter. Not the kind of quiet that's peaceful, just muted, like someone had turned the bass down on the world. My phone's battery, which had been at 70% when I left the gallery, dropped to 40 in about 10 minutes while I filmed. It did that glitchy, jumpy thing phones sometimes do, where the percentage ticks down fast and then levels. I blame the cold. Then my watch, a cheap thing, but it's the one I've had since grad school, ticked back 10 minutes when I looked at it. I must have been somewhere between tired and punchy. I made a joke about missing my curfew, and Len laughed, but he didn't sound like his usual self. He said, "Did you see anything weird on the way here?" And I told him only my cab driver had trouble with directions. Dara said, "No, nothing," and looked at the ground. The big thing that made my skin move a little was a noise that came from the quarry. It was like a metallic tapping, slow and patient, not the sound of construction or a car. It came 3 times in a row and stopped. There was no echo, no after sound. The hairs on my arms prickled, and Dara clutched her clutch tighter. Probably a loose pipe, Len said, but his voice was thin. Nobody went to check the quarry. We just stood there. Then I pointed the phone out over the rail and kept filming the horizon. The light was changing faster now, as it does, and I wanted that moment where color takes over and the city outlines sharpen. The video starts with the usual rooftops, the line of the river dark against the sky, a plane trailing a slow white stripe, far off. For maybe 40 seconds, there's nothing except the city breathing and us talking soft. I didn't notice the shape when I was filming. I only noticed it after because I watched the clip on loop for a long time that night. In the footage, About 57 seconds in, the camera catches a dark blot against the last bright band of the sky. A patch so black it ate the color behind it. It's small at first, hovering low above the far ridge where the old radio towers stand, and then in the space of 1 or 2 frames, it darts from the left edge of the frame to the right. It literally cuts across the view so fast the motion is a single hard smear. No trail, no blur. It vanishes at the far corner like someone pulled a curtain shut. There's no sound on the clip to match it. We were talking in the moment, you can hear us in the recording, and nobody says anything about it. Nobody flinches. It's as if the thing moved through another speed that doesn't translate to human reaction time. I paused the video and rewound. The shape is a black delta, triangular maybe, but that's probably just how pixels render when something moves that fast. I blew up the frame on my phone and my fingers would slip on the screen because I couldn't keep my hand from trembling. I asked Dara if she remembered seeing anything, and she looked at me like I was joking. Like what? She said. Len said he'd seen a plane, but not at our level, and he mimed a slow, lazy arc with his hand. He swore he hadn't seen a black thing dart across. My own memory of the minutes where the clip shows the smear is foggy. 1,000 small things. The taste of apple from the alley, the cold, the cadence of Dara's laugh. No motion registered. We all watched the raw clip together, right then on the stoop. The camera shows us talking, laughing even, doing nothing that shouted, "Look up." On playback, the smear is undeniable. Dara's eyes went to the sky when I replayed it, and she frowned, pulled her coat tighter. Len kept saying, "Shouldn't we have seen that?" Like he was testing if reality would answer. We rewound the same second another half-dozen times. The smear is always there, always the same sudden streak. It doesn't dart out of frame and linger. It punches through the corner and is gone. Nobody else in the footage changes expression when it passes. Even the dogs on the neighboring rooftop don't bark. If I'd been alone, I could have chalked it up to a trick of the lens. Having 2 people there who couldn't remember it opened a little hollow in my confidence. After that, we did the sensible, boring things. Dara said we should post the clip, put it up somewhere, get other eyes on it. Len made the joke about finally catching something to put on his Urban Legends blog. I uploaded the clip to a cloud drive while sitting on the steps. For a minute, the upload refused and my phone shivered like it was deciding whether to obey. Then it went through. I sent the link to a friend who works at the paper. She said she'd take a look. My phone went from 40 to 38% in the time it took to write an email, and that felt cartoony even then. What happened after we went inside is why the night hardened in my mind. The 3 of us split up. Dara to check on a delivery she'd promised, Len back to his place to water his plants, me to the little kitchenette in my flat to make tea. I watched the clip twice more alone, the smear still nothing but a smear. And then I walked across to the window to look at the exact point in the sky where the shape had shown up. The sky was a flat navy now, the last bruise of orange gone. There were no lights moving. My neighbor across the alley was outside smoking, and he looked up when I waved. "Beautiful night," he said. "Sightseeing?" I showed him the clip on my phone, and he squinted and said, "Must be a bird, small." I asked him if he remembered anything in the minute we filmed, and he said no. Nothing. He took a drag and went back in. The strangest cluster of small things followed. My apartment's stereo, which I never left on when I'm out, started playing the radio at a low volume. I went in and turned it off, and the display read 12:07, even though my phone and the hallway clock both said 7:12. The kettle would not whistle. It boiled and then cooled with only a faint hiss that sounded like a long exhale. My cat, Miso, who is usually indifferent to rooftop goings-on, refused to come out from beneath the bed for an hour. She'd never been dramatic like that. My inbox filled with 3 messages from a local forum. Did anyone else notice the light over the quarry? The messages were short and tentative, all from people I didn't know. One said they'd seen a shadow and that it moved so quick. Another called it a trick of the clouds. Faces like Len's and Dara's tried to smooth everything with jokes and explanations. The email from my friend at the paper came the next morning. She'd shown the clip to a couple of people over coffee. One astrophysics grad student had said the smear could be a meteor seen from a low angle, Another said the shape wasn't meteor shape at all, and that a smear this fast should leave a trail on a long exposure frame. A local drone hobbyist wrote that shadowing like the sort on screen often happened when a drone moved behind a bird. The consensus was polite and uncommitted. But the thing that bothered me more than the explanations was how neat and how unremarkable our reactions had been in the moment. We were three people in a place where look up is the simplest command, and whatever moved didn't cause us to look up. It moved in a register that didn't translate into our perception, or that we somehow skipped. This stuck to me like a loose thread. The video existed, and I had it, and I watched it until my eyes blurred, and yet the memory of actually seeing it in real time felt like a half-remembered dream. I kept replaying the frames where the black thing darts, and I could feel my throat tighten the way it does if you've swallowed something unexpected. Weeks passed. The upload got traction on the small circles of the internet that relish odd stuff. People speculated. Someone with better software than I had enhanced the footage and insisted the object had a beveled edge. Another person argued it was just digital artifact, a compression error. A couple of acquaintances tagged me in a comment thread that read like a warm newsroom debate. What is it? Where's the rest of the footage? We need a better lens. I found myself watching the horizon more, not the grand sunset kind, but the thin strip where sky meets roof and antennae line up like teeth. I stood on that wall at odd hours, cigarette in hand, even though I didn't usually smoke, thinking I might catch it again. For a while, I didn't want to be alone when I did that, but mostly I did it by myself. Dara stopped joining. She said she was tired of being on screens. Len texted once to say he thought maybe we shouldn't poke at it. Some things are just night things, he wrote. The footage remained the only concrete thing I had. The smear on my phone, and the memory of a night where the pigeons were gone and the quarry tapped like a finger on a rail. Nothing else lined up in a tidy way. No lights in the paper, no official note from the city about stray drones or weather anomalies. People moved on to shows and new roofs and election ads. The clip drifted in the internet the way small things do. Noticed for a day, then a memory for the rest. Sometimes, when I'm walking home late and the sky is bare, I find myself slowing at the corner and looking up, phone in my hand, half hoping I'll catch a dark shape cutting the frame. I haven't seen it again. The clip sits in a folder labeled October, and every so often I watch the second, where the smear appears, and I still feel that exact small hunch in my chest, the part that knows you looked at a thing the world didn't remember looking at with you. I had been out since first light, sitting in a saddle on a frozen ridge where the pines leaned away from the wind and the world narrowed to a single path through oak and laurel. It was late November, the sort of cold that makes your face ache when you breathe too fast. I'd come out for a morning hunt mostly to get away from everything. Work, bills, the apartment that always seemed to need something fixed. My name's Caleb Hartman. I grew up hunting with my uncle, learned how to move slow and quiet and keep my voice to a half breath. This day started like any other. Thermos of coffee, a packed sandwich, my dog Bo curled in the truck seat like he owned the upholstery. Bo and I took the lower trail where the deer ran most often. The leaves were brittle underfoot, and the creek that usually chattered below the switchback was low and nearly still. The sky was a thin gray that threatened snow but never committed. I'd only been walking maybe 20 minutes when the first tiny thing felt off. The birds stopped. Not just slowed down, gone, like somebody had turned the radio off. You could hear the branch joints creak where the birds had been, but no wings. Nothing in the leaf litter moving like a startled animal. Bo stopped too, ears pricked, and wouldn't move for a second. He's usually the one to make me laugh when something small goes by. That morning, he stood stock still and stared at a thicket like it owed him money. We pressed on. I told myself it was probably just the weather or a hawk in the area, and kept scanning the cut lines and the ridge tops. 10 minutes later, there was that other little wrongness. A high-tension line across the next hollow blinked once, twice, then went steady. It was nothing I could have fixed with tools or patience, but it was the kind of detail my brain filed away, like a tick under the skin of the day. I'd taken my uncle's old Remington. He gave it to me when his knees stopped letting him climb, said, "Carry her careful," like folks say, break a leg. The scope was a little fogged from the cold. I cleared it on my sleeve and checked my rangefinder. Everything should have been routine. We found a tree that offered a good perch, and I climbed up into a fork where the wood felt like furniture. Bo settled under the roots and dozed, the way dogs do when they trust the ground. Another small thing happened while I waited. A farmhouse bell across the valley tolled once. 3 slow, patient rings, and then silence where there should have been 3 more. People in that valley use that bell for simple things. Supper ready, someone coming in. It stopping mid-pattern made me look down at my watch. It had slipped back 5 minutes. I shrugged it off and told myself not to be that guy who reads meaning into small faults. The woods held a kind of hollow hush the closer it got to noon. Leaves didn't stir. The usual scent, wet earth, the faint musk of rut-season deer, seemed less vivid, as if the air had been washed. Bo came up and nosed my boot like he wanted me to move. He wasn't anxious so much as unwilling to be alone, the way horses get when a strange horse is close by. I stood, stretched, and decided to move a little further down the ridge where the canopy broke, and the field opened in a horseshoe of brown grass that smelled faintly of last year's hay. That's when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were lanterns someone hung in the trees for a wedding or a party, little globes of warm light bobbing among branches. They weren't like glowworms or flashlights. They drifted back and forth, each one hung in a different place, but moving together, like a line of tiny lamps walking on a string through the boughs. They weren't bright, more like pocketed, intimate glows, so you could see their shape through the needles, the way a candle looks when you press it to thin paper. I sat down because that's what my body did when something made the hair on my neck stand up. It sought cover so it could watch. The lights moved in perfect sync, weaving between the trunks and then settling as if someone invisible had set them on branches and was dragging them along. Bo put his head on my knee and didn't whine or bark. He just watched. The hush held in a way that made the watch on my wrist feel louder than it should. My thumb brushed the safety on the Remington without me thinking. Hunters do that, a small habitual attention to what's in your hands. I held the rifle up to my shoulder and raised the scope. I wanted a closer look. For half a second, I can still see through that lens. 3 or 4 white points of light, each with a faint halo, drifting like slow fireflies. They were close enough that the scope's crosshairs divided them, but far enough that a shot would have been stupid. I didn't intend to shoot, not unless something walked out of the trees that was a threat. Still, the scope makes things honest, removes possibility. It brings distance up close and manageable. When I centered on one of the lights, they scattered. I mean, they didn't flit like startled birds. They uncoiled out of the trees and went straight up. Not an arc, not a climb with wobble, straight like a line drawn. They rose faster than anything I expected, but there was no sound, no wind, no motor, no cracking of branches. One after another, they pierced the canopy and kept going until the pale gray swallowed them. For a second, it looked like a string of pearls sliding through a sleeve. Then the sleeve closed and nothing remained but the ordinary sky. The rifle creaked in my hands for a moment where I had gripped it too tightly. Bo barked once, a single sharp bark, and then sat back down as if he hadn't meant to. I could feel the blood in my ears. There was no thunder or commotion, just a blankness where the lights had been. The trees didn't look bent or burned. The branches where the lights had been were untouched, no scuff marks, no singe. If anything had passed between the trunks, it had left nothing put there. When I got down from the fork and walked the line where the lights had been most visible, I found no footprints, no dropped glass or candles, nothing a person could have hung. The underbrush showed only the usual animal lanes, rabbit runs, and a deer's resting hollow deeper in. The earth held the weight of small animals and boots, but no geometric pattern, no tool mark. It was like someone had placed something ephemeral in the trees and then taken it away clean. I stayed longer than I meant to. You'd think I would have gone straight home, put the rifle in the gun safe, and told the story to someone who'd laugh and call me superstitious. But there's a kind of stubbornness in men who have learned a thing or two about the woods. I wanted to know if it would come back. I sat by the creek and watched the line of pines until the light bent into late afternoon. The quiet persisted. At one point, a distant truck's engine trembled, cut out, and then resumed as if it had been waiting for permission. Little things, each mundane on their face, stacked into a sense of being watched, but not in a way that felt malevolent, more like being observed for accuracy. On the walk back, I ran into a neighbor, Jared Mills, near the old oak by the road. He's a good man, a government mechanic by trade, been after coyotes since he was a kid, and I trusted him more than most. I asked if he'd seen anything odd that afternoon. He shrugged and said he'd heard dogs fussing down in the hollow at noon, but figured the wind had pushed a scent their way. When I told him what I'd seen about the lights, he looked at me like I'd told him the moon was blue. He said, "You sure you weren't half asleep, Cal?" He grinned in the way men do to smooth the edge off a confession. When I said Bo had stared like nothing I'd ever seen, my voice went small and rough. Jared didn't press, but he fixed the tailgate on his truck and said, "Keep an ear out. If you see anything else, call." He left. I went home, but I didn't sleep well. I lay awake thinking about the way the lights had left nothing and taken nothing, and how small, precise moments, the bird silence, the bell cutting off, had come before them like a preface. In the weeks that followed, I told a few people, sparingly, my uncle over coffee at his kitchen table, Jared again when we checked fence lines, one of the guys at the feed store who listens to everything. Some nodded as if they had a list of possible misfires and could check each off. Others looked at me like an open door, the kind you shouldn't step through if you can help it. No one suggested anything useful. No one had seen the lights except me and Bo, and dogs don't testify in court. Time makes room for ordinary chores and dull things. The weather closed around Thanksgiving, and the field crusted with the first real frost. Bo and I still go out sometimes, because the pattern of heading down the ridge and scanning the undergrowth is a kind of prayer. I bring my rifle, and I look through the scope when I need to remind myself that the world can be read and measured. Most days, it's only deer and the quiet of trees. Once, weeks later, when the moon lay thick and the air smelled of coal smoke from the valley, I thought I saw a faint pinprick of light drift where the lanterns had been. I raised the scope, held breath, and waited. The pinprick blinked out, no motion, like someone had decided I didn't need to know. I drove home that night with Bo asleep across the seat, his head on my lap. The truck heater blew warm air, and I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with walking. I put the rifle in the safe and drank coffee until my hands stopped trembling. I haven't figured out what those lights were. I haven't found a mark or a pattern that's anything more than human guesswork. I do know the woods have a way of being honest and a way of lying, and the lights fit neither category cleanly. They were there, precise and silent, and then they were not. That was the part that stayed with me. The clean takeaway, the way the world settled back as if nothing had happened, leaving me to decide whether to trust what my eyes had shown me. We pulled into the diner a little after midnight. The place sat low against the highway, one of those squat buildings with a long row of windows, a neon sign buzzing faintly over the roof. I was riding with Pete, hauling a load of machinery across state lines. We'd been driving most of the night, and my eyes were starting to blur against the white lines. Pete suggested we stop for coffee, and I didn't argue. The gravel crunched under the tires as we pulled in. The lot was empty, save for one old Ford parked crooked near the side. Inside, the lights were still on, humming a bit too bright for the hour. We climbed out, stretched stiff backs, and pushed through the glass door with its little silver handle. The place was quiet, save for a fan somewhere near the ceiling. A jukebox stood dark in the corner, and a few of the booths had crumbs scattered across them, like folks had just left. Behind the counter, a woman looked up from wiping down a stack of mugs. She was maybe in her 40s, hair tied back, face kind but tired. "Evenin'," she said with a small smile, like we weren't the first strays she'd seen roll in late. We slid onto stools at the counter. The seats squeaked under our weight. Pete cleared his throat. 2 coffees, he said. She nodded, reached for the pot, and poured. The smell of burnt beans filled the air, sharp but welcome after hours on the road. I cupped my hands around the mug, letting the heat soak in. You boys headed west? She asked. Yeah, Pete said. Long haul. She nodded again, quiet for a moment, then leaned a little closer over the counter. Her eyes shifted between us like she was debating something. Then, with a voice calm as if she were asking about the weather, she said, "Did you see them too?" He frowned, brow pulling tight. "See who?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just gave that same small smile, like she knew something we didn't, then straightened up and carried the pot into the kitchen. The swinging door flapped once, then fell shut. Pete and I sat there a long minute, mugs steaming in our hands, neither of us speaking. The clock above the counter ticked soft but steady. The place felt different all of a sudden. Emptier, like the air had dropped a few degrees. I shifted on my stool, craning toward the kitchen door. No clatter of dishes, no running water, nothing. Just silence. "Maybe she's making more coffee," Pete muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. We waited another 5 minutes. Nobody came out. Pete tapped his fingers against the counter. Finally, he stood and walked over to the kitchen door, pushed it gently open. The hinges squeaked. "Well?" I asked. He stepped inside, disappeared for a beat, then came back shaking his head. "Nobody there," I laughed, though it came out thin. "What do you mean, nobody there?" "I mean the place is empty. Stove's cold, no lights on in the back, just boxes stacked up, like it ain't been used in weeks." I got up and checked for myself. He was right. The kitchen was bare, shelves dusty, floor swept clean. No half-washed dishes, no food smells, nothing. It looked like no one had cooked back there in a long time. But I'd seen her carry the pot through that door. Pete had too. Back at the counter, our mugs still sat steaming. Full. Coffee dark and fresh, like it had just been poured. We sat back down, not knowing what else to do. The neon sign buzzed faint through the glass, throwing a sickly pink glow across the room. My stomach churned. "You heard what she said," Pete murmured finally. I nodded. "Yeah." We didn't talk about it again, not then. We finished our coffees in silence. The clock ticked on. I swear, the place grew quieter with each passing minute, like the whole diner was holding its breath. When we finally stood to leave, I glanced back at the counter. The 2 mugs still sat there, but something about them seemed off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe the way the steam rose slower than it should have, or how the liquid inside didn't ripple when I set mine down. Outside, the highway stretched black and empty. The air was still. No crickets, no wind, only the sound of our boots on gravel. We climbed back into the cab, shut the doors, and pulled out. The neon glow fell away in the rear view, swallowed by the night. For a while, neither of us spoke. The tires hummed, headlights cutting the dark. Finally, Pete cleared his throat. "You think she was asking about lights?" he said. I didn't answer right away. A few hours earlier, somewhere east of town, I had noticed something strange low over the fields. A pale glow drifting too smooth to be a plane, too steady to be a lantern. I hadn't mentioned it at the time. Figured my eyes were just playing tricks after so many miles. Now I wasn't so sure. Pete must have seen something too. The way he kept his hands tight on the wheel, staring hard at the road, told me enough. We didn't stop again that night, and we never went back to that diner. I was driving my family home that night, a narrow stretch of road just outside of Plainfield, New Hampshire. My wife, Claire, was in the passenger seat, and the kids, Timmy and Sally, were in the back, half asleep. The air was cold, and a thin fog had settled over the pines that bordered the road, making the beams from our headlights dull and yellowish. I'd been on this route plenty of times, but that night everything felt different. Slower somehow, like the fog was thickening around us more than it should have. I had just rounded a bend when I saw them, 2 bright points of light in the distance, perfectly aligned, coming straight at us. At first, I thought it was a car, but something about it didn't feel right. The lights didn't waver like headlights usually do. They stayed exactly level with each other. My first instinct was to slow down and pull over to the side of the road, and I heard Claire mutter, "Someone's coming," in that low, nervous voice she sometimes gets. The lights got closer, and I realized there was no sound, no engine, no tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, nothing. Just those two spots of brightness, steady, staring at us like eyes. I slowed all the way down and eased our Plymouth over to the side. The kids stirred a little, and Timmy asked if we were going to stop for someone. I told him yes, just a minute. Then the weird part happened. The lights lifted. Not like a car going over a hill, but literally rose from the road, drifting upwards silently, almost lazily, like they were buoyant or floating on some invisible current. Claire gasped, and I could hear her clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. Timmy and Sally were both sitting up now, wide-eyed. The lights went higher, past the tops of the trees, and then drifted slowly toward the east, disappearing into the thicker darkness of the forest beyond. I sat there a moment, unsure if I had imagined it. My hand was still on the gear shift, and my foot was frozen over the brake. The fog swirled around the car in a way that made it hard to tell which way was up. Claire finally said, "Did you see that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We drove on, slower this time, the kids asking if it was a plane or a helicopter. I told them I didn't know, but I didn't say anything about the lights floating. There was no engine noise, no evidence of anything mechanical. Just 2 points of light, moving like they weren't bound by gravity. About 15 minutes later, as we approached the old bridge over Cedar Brook, I thought I saw something in the trees to our left. A movement that didn't match the natural sway of the branches. I blinked, trying to focus, and it seemed like there was a figure, maybe 4 feet tall, standing perfectly still. I could only catch glimpses between the trees, but I felt it watching us. My grip tightened on the wheel. "Dad?" Sally whispered from the back. "Why is it dark over there?" "Nothing, honey," I said, though my voice sounded hollow to me. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was moving with us just out of sight. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but the fog seemed heavier, pressing against the car windows like it was alive. Occasionally, I'd catch a flicker of light out of the corner of my eye, small glimmers, too quick to be fireflies, too bright for stars. I looked for animals on the road, but there was nothing. No deer, no rabbits, no raccoon. Just fog, dark trees, and that unsettling feeling of being observed. By the time we got to the edge of town, the fog thinned and the lights of the houses looked ordinary. The kids had quieted down, Claire was pale but trying to stay calm, and I was just glad to see street lamps again. I parked in front of our house and didn't move for a while, just staring at the black line of the road disappearing into the trees. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound of that road in my head, the way the fog had sounded against the car, and the faint echo of something lifting silently. I went back outside around midnight to check the road. Nothing. Just the empty road, some ice glinting under the moon, and the occasional owl calling from the pines. No tracks, no footprints, nothing to explain what I'd seen. The next day, I went back to the stretch where we'd pulled over. There were tire marks from our Plymouth and the faint impression of our car's wheels on the gravel, but no sign that any other vehicle had passed through. Not a mark, not a smudge, nothing at all. I walked along the roadside for nearly a mile, checking for footprints or broken branches. The trees were all untouched. I asked a neighbor if they'd seen anything odd the night before. They hadn't. No one reported strange lights or missing time. I wondered if I had made it up, but I knew I hadn't. Claire had seen it too, and she wasn't the type to jump at shadows. A week later, I was driving past the same road, trying to act normal, and I felt a tug of dread in the pit of my stomach. The fog had rolled back in that evening, heavier than I remembered. I slowed down, and for a moment I thought I saw something moving just at the edge of the trees again, a shimmer, like a reflection or a ripple. My heart started pounding, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. I still don't know what it was. 2 lights, rising off the ground, silently, drifting into the sky, and that fleeting glimpse of movement in the trees. I've gone back to that road plenty of times, during the day, at night, in clear weather, in fog, but it hasn't happened again. Still, every time I pass that stretch, I feel like someone or something is watching, just out of reach. Some people think I made it up, or that it was a trick of fog and headlights, but I know what I saw. The weirdest part is that it wasn't threatening. There was no roar, no danger, no pain, just presence, moving in ways it shouldn't. I can't explain it, and that's what keeps me uneasy. Claire says I shouldn't dwell on it, that our family is safe and the lights probably had a simple explanation. Maybe. But the image of those two lights, lifting off the ground and gliding away without sound, stays with me. Sometimes at night, when the wind is low and the fog presses against the window, I imagine them rising again, just beyond the pines, waiting. I tell the story like this because it's real. Nothing has come after us, nothing followed the car, nothing tried to touch us. But there's a strange emptiness in that part of the road, a quiet that doesn't belong. And I know, if the fog rolls in again, I'll see it too. The kids never mentioned it again. Claire never wanted to drive that road at night for a while. I understand why. And I understand that some things, no matter how clearly you see them, don't fit with the world as you know it. You just have to accept that and keep driving. That's what we did. It was sometime after midnight when I woke up. I didn't know what time exactly because my phone was buried somewhere in my pack, and I wasn't about to unzip my sleeping bag to go hunting for it. What woke me was this faint, irregular crunching sound, like someone walking on loose gravel. The sound carried in that strange, muffled way things do at night in the woods, where you can't tell if something is 10 feet away or 50. I lay there for a bit, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon nosing around or a deer passing through, but it wasn't quite right for that. The sound was too steady, slow, measured steps, and it kept a straight, deliberate path. No pauses, no sniffing, no rustling in the underbrush, just crunch, 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 like boots on a driveway. The problem was, there wasn't a driveway. I was camped in a small clearing I'd hiked to earlier that day, maybe a quarter mile from the main trail. The only gravel was the ring of pale stones marking the edge of the clearing. I sat up, listening harder. My eyes were adjusting, picking up the faint silver of moonlight filtering through the branches. The crunching got closer, close enough that I knew whatever it was had reached the edge of the clearing, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a person. At least, it didn't move like one. A faint white glow. Not bright, more like the light from a dying flashlight, slid slowly along the tree line. I don't mean it shone on the trees. It was in the trees, weaving behind them but staying visible, like the glow itself was moving. It made no sound, no footsteps, no twigs snapping, just that steady, shifting light. My mouth went dry. I didn't move, I just watched it drift along, maybe 30 feet away, tracing the edge of the clearing like it was circling. It wasn't swinging like a lantern or swaying like a flashlight beam. It just floated sideways, low to the ground, like it was following a rail I couldn't see. At some point, my hand found the zipper of my tent. I was thinking if it was someone messing around, I needed to see more, or maybe yell to scare them off. I eased the zipper down, slow as I could, but even that tiny metallic sound felt loud enough to give me away. When I finally opened the flap enough to stick my head out, the glow was gone. No sound, no movement, just the clearing, the dark trees, and the cold air on my face. I sat there for maybe a minute, scanning the tree line. I didn't hear it leave. I didn't hear anything at all, actually, not even the usual nighttime noises. No crickets, no wind in the leaves, dead quiet. I pulled the flap closed and sat back inside, listening. I kept thinking I'd hear it again, more crunching, maybe coming from the other side, but nothing. I must have sat there for another half hour before I finally unzipped the bag and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut across the clearing, lighting up the pale stones, the fire pit, the low grass. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I swung the light toward the trees where I'd seen the glow, but there was nothing, just trunks and shadows. I walked to the edge, sweeping the light over the ground. No footprints, no disturbed grass. The gravel ring was untouched. When I turned back toward the tent, I noticed something that made me stop. My backpack, which I'd left under the vestibule, was now sitting upright in the middle of the clearing. I hadn't touched it since I'd gone to bed. I walked over and checked it. The straps were buckled, the zippers still closed. I opened the main compartment. It was all there. Food, clothes, phone. Nothing missing, nothing added, just moved. I didn't sleep much after that. I I sat in the tent with the flashlight in my lap until the sky started to lighten. In the morning, the clearing looked normal. No footprints in the dirt. The gravel ring was undisturbed. The only sign anything had been there was my backpack, sitting exactly where it had been when I'd found it. I packed up and left, cutting my trip short. I didn't look back when I reached the trail. I was on the roof because the roof is the only place in my block that still has darkness enough to see anything beyond the sodium street lamps. I'd set the telescope up between the rusting HVAC units and a dying potted palm, tripod feet on the gravel, red headlamp tucked into my jacket so I wouldn't wreck my night vision. My name's Marco Reyes. I'm not an astronomer, just someone who likes to point expensive glass at empty bits of sky and try to make sense of the small things moving up there. The night was the kind of cold that sharpens edges. Late October, clear, with a thin crescent moon. I was logging the Cassiopeia sweep when my planet tracking app pinged a satellite pass. I always check satellites. They move like they're on rails. This didn't. At first I saw 4 points of light, evenly spaced, crawling across the sky as if someone had snapped a line of LEDs into place. They held formation perfectly. No drift, no jitter. Just that quiet, mechanical glide. Then they did something that made me sit back from the eyepiece because it made no sense in any of the little rhythms I knew. The formation split. Not a diffusion or a scattering like a flock of birds, but a clean break. The 4 points arranged into a square, then 2 points slotted inward to make a diamond. And suddenly one of the points folded inward on an angle so sharp it looked like the light had just stopped being a dot and was now an edge. The motion was instantaneous, like a page flipping. I blinked and the thing had changed again, corners forming and reforming, more geometry than flight. I checked the scope for reflection, tapped the eyepiece, thought maybe an internal glitch. The live feed on my phone showed the same thing, just smaller, so it wasn't me hallucinating. I started recording because that's what you do when something refuses to behave. You make a copy, so later you can argue with it. The lights moved with that odd, clean choreography for maybe 3 minutes. They'd push in, snap apart, slide sideways without the faintest arc, vanish for a blink, and reappear a fraction of a degree away. No sound at all. The air on the roof was ordinary. Traffic down the avenue, a dog barking once, a far plane. But the motion itself had the wrong physics. Sharp turns that would tear apart any aerodynamic surface, pauses that weren't pauses but jumps. After 10 minutes, I felt stupid and small and intensely awake all at once. The sky settled back into its normal scatter. An airplane crossed with its blinking nav lights, a satellite that actually behaved like a satellite. I packed the scope away with my hands, still a little clumsy. I thumbed the recording and saw the file, the little thumbnail moving, but when I tried to open it, my phone choked. File corrupted, the media app said, which is the polite way electronics tell you you don't own the moment you thought you owned. I shrugged and went inside because it was late and because there's always the argument that rooftops have the best ghosts. The next morning I had to get up for work at the public library downtown. I've been the evening reference librarian there for 3 years. The job is mostly lending answers and shushing teenagers. Library work is sensible, which is why what happened after the roof felt strange on top of strange. I walked out of the staff entrance at 8:15 and 2 men were on the sidewalk across the street. I noticed them because the morning felt ordinary, and then the men were there. 2 dark silhouettes in suits unlike anything you see on a Tuesday outside a library. Black wool, narrow ties, shoes so clean they looked new. They were standing under the awning of a closed storefront, both staring in the exact direction of the library entrance. They weren't talking, they weren't shifting weight, they were just watching. There was something about them that made my stomach drop slow and precise. The way they held still like a camera prevents motion blur. The sameness of their posture, the way they avoided buying coffee or even pretending to check their phones. It was the way movie extras look when the director hasn't called rap. I told myself I was being childish. Maybe they were waiting for a friend, maybe they were private security. People wait on sidewalks all the time. I changed my route to the front door because the staff entrance was closer, but as I passed the window of the bakery across the street, I caught them out of the corner of my eye. Still there, still watching. Inside, I couldn't focus. Someone asked me where the genealogy microfilm was, and I pointed and then had to go back and look at the copy of the roof video I'd finally managed to force into existence on my backup drive. The file opened this time, but there was a single frame where the lights folded inward that was pure white, like someone had erased that instant. I scrubbed back and forth, and the white frame stayed the size of a single heartbeat. At 11, I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. He raised an eyebrow. People call in for colds all the time, but I could see him thinking it over and deciding the day would pass without me. When I walked back out to the staff entrance, the two men were closer now, under the plane trees by the newsstand, still staring at the library door. They hadn't budged. They didn't follow me. They didn't approach. They merely stood and watched in that slow, spectator silence until I rounded the corner and started home with my chest a little tight and the afternoon wide open. The whole way back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting them to be driving behind me the way men in suits in bad movies do. The street was empty except for a delivery van. The world had its usual noise. Trains, a kid on a bicycle, someone on a lawnmower. I should have called someone. Police, a friend, a manager, but the rational options reeked a little of overreaction. Excuse me, there are two men staring at my workplace doesn't sit comfortably in the phone. Instead, I sat on my couch and tried to make sense of the white frame. I tried to find the moment again on my site clipboard, dug the backup card out of the glove box, but a day later, the file behaved differently. The recording would play up to the white frame and then, as if bored, jump forward a second and resume. Not corrupted, altered in a way that looked like someone had edited the world's continuity. Over the next 48 hours, other little things piled up around that first weirdness. My apartment clock lost 7 minutes and then caught back up. My neighbor told me her baby monitor recorded a burst of static at 2 a.m. No voice, no melody, just a thin sweep like the breath of old radio tubes. My phone battery drained faster than it had any right to. The weather app on my tablet showed rain for the afternoon the next week, and then, when I checked again, a different forecast. Small, plausible glitches, each one wearing the shape of coincidence. On Wednesday, I went back to work. I said I'd been clear-headed all morning, and meant it at first until I rounded the newsstand and the men were there again. A little further down, still in their suits and still watching the door like they were cataloging the comings and goings. A mother with a stroller paused and looked at them and then hurried away differently, like her sense of a normal morning had shifted. A bus driver swapped a look with a shopkeeper and then shrugged it off. The men kept watching. When I left early again at lunchtime, they watched me a while longer. From the sidewalk, their faces were as blank as copies. No sunglasses to hide eyes, nothing to anchor them to the rest of the city. I kept my head down and walked. The whole time I had the odd sensation that they knew which pocket held the telescope key, that they had the white frame of my video memorized like a schedule. I thought about parking across town for the evening, about sleeping at a friend's, about changing my clothes and vanishing for a night. But I didn't do any of those things. I walked home because habit is a tie. That night I tried to be ordinary. I cooked pasta, I did the dishes, I pretended the sky was the same sky. The topaz of the streetlight through the blinds looked the same as it ever did. I left a red headlamp in the drawer by the door, just in case. When I closed my eyes, the white frame was a bright, jagged thing behind my eyelids. I don't know what those lights were on the roof. I don't know who the men were on the sidewalk. I don't know whether the missing frame is a hole someone cut in time, or a bad app, or a trick of electronics colluding with my nerves. All I know is that the city felt a little watched for a while, like when you notice a new camera and can't unsee it. I also know I left work early 2 days running and that two men in suits stood across the street both times and did nothing but look until I was gone. We were coming back from dinner at my sister's place, out past the edge of town. It was one of those clear, cold nights where the stars actually look sharp, and the moon was bright enough to throw shadows across the road. Julie was driving, and I had the window cracked because I liked the smell of the air out there. We'd just come off Route 19, maybe 10 minutes from our place, when something passed across the moon. I don't mean clouds, there weren't any. This was solid, perfectly circular, or close enough that my brain read it that way. It moved slow enough that I actually saw it block the light, then the moonlight came back and it was gone. Julie saw it too. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell from the way her hands tightened on the wheel. "Did you?" I started, and she just nodded, still looking straight ahead. We didn't talk much after that. The road felt emptier than usual, even though it's never really busy out there at night. By the time we hit the turnoff for our street, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a plane catching the light weird or a bird closer than I thought. When we pulled into the driveway, that's when I saw him. There was a black car, looked like one of those older Lincolns, shiny but not new, parked just outside the entrance to our drive. A man was leaning against it. Black suit, black tie, white shirt. No coat, even though you could see his breath in the air. He wasn't looking at us when we first saw him, just kind of staring toward the tree line across the street. Julie slowed almost to a stop at the bottom of the driveway. That's when he turned his head toward us. His movements were slow and exact, like someone in a movie hitting a mark. I could see his face now, pale, thin, no facial hair, no glasses. His eyes seemed dark, not just in color, dark like there was nothing catching the light in them. When Julie rolled the car forward, he stepped toward her side of the window, not fast, but like he already knew we weren't going to drive away. "You enjoy the show tonight?" he asked. His voice was low, even, and didn't match his expression, which was nothing at all. Neither of us answered right away. I think Julie thought he might be talking about something else, like fireworks or some local thing we didn't know about, but he just kept looking at her, waiting. "What show?" she finally asked. His mouth twitched into something that could have been a smile, but only for a second. "The one you just saw." He said it like he was correcting her, like she'd already admitted something. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but my throat went dry. Julie didn't say anything either, just put the car in park. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. Not crickets, not wind, nothing. It wasn't dead silent exactly, more like every other sound had been pushed way into the background. The man looked at me then for the first time. His gaze didn't move between us, just locked onto me and stayed there. "Do you have any questions?" he said. I shook my head without meaning to. "Good," he said, and stepped back from the car. He didn't turn around when he walked back to the black Lincoln, just moved backwards, still facing us back, until he was right up against the driver's side door. Then he slid in without looking down, like he knew exactly where it was. Julie pulled up the driveway fast. When we got to the garage, she didn't get out right away. We just sat there for a minute, both of us looking in the mirrors. The street was empty. The next morning, I went out early to get the paper. There were 2 sets of tire tracks on the shoulder where that car had been parked, but no footprints in the frost, not even ours from the night before. I was about 6 miles into the trail when I saw it. The weather had been strange all morning. Sunny one minute, then gusts of cold wind cutting across the ridge the next. I'd started the hike around 8, planning to make it to the lookout by noon, maybe eat lunch up there before heading back down. The air smelled like rain, but the clouds kept breaking apart before anything fell. The trail opened up along a bare stretch of rock, no trees for maybe 200 yards. That's when I noticed something against the sky. At first I thought it was a hawk just hanging in place, riding an updraft, but it wasn't moving at all. The wind was strong enough that I could feel it shoving at my jacket, pulling at the straps of my pack, yet this thing didn't shift an inch. I stopped walking and stared. It was darker than the sky behind it. Not black, exactly, but a flat, dead kind of gray, with no shine or shadow. I took a couple steps forward and realized it wasn't bird-shaped at all. It was a perfect triangle. Not roughly triangular, Perfect. All three sides identical, the corners sharp enough that even from that distance, they looked like they could cut you. I set my pack down and pulled out the small binoculars I keep for bird watching. Through the lenses, it looked even stranger. There was no texture to it, no sign of panels or wings or anything. Just a solid, featureless triangle, hanging there like someone had nailed a piece of matte black metal to the sky. The edges didn't blur in the wind. The trees around me were swaying, the clouds were ripping apart overhead, but that shape didn't move at all. I must have stared for a solid minute before lowering the binoculars to blink and rub my eyes. When I looked back up with just my naked eyes, it was gone. The sky was empty, just blue patches and moving clouds. My stomach dropped in a way that felt completely out of proportion to what I'd just seen, but there was something about how wrong it had looked that made my skin feel tight. I scanned the sky for 10 minutes, thinking maybe it had drifted or my eyes had played tricks on me. Nothing. No birds, no planes, nothing. The wind was still blowing hard, and it carried this low, almost humming sound. Not from the sky, but from somewhere farther down the slope. I couldn't place it. The trail dipped into a wooded section after that, and I told myself I was just being jumpy. But the deeper I went into the trees, the more it felt like the wind had stopped. The branches weren't moving, the leaves didn't rustle. My own footsteps sounded too loud. I checked my phone for signal. 1 bar, then none, then one again, which isn't unusual out there, but for some reason I kept checking every couple minutes. About half an hour later, I heard something behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like a single crunch on the gravel, then silence. I turned around, nothing there. I kept walking, but the sound happened again, maybe 20 feet back. This time when I turned, the woods felt emptier, like there should have been more color and movement, but there wasn't. I picked up the pace, telling myself I was just spooking at normal forest noises. I passed a small clearing where the sunlight hit the grass in this pale, washed-out way, almost like early morning light, except my watch said it was nearly noon. The humming sound from before came back, but higher pitched now, just at the edge of hearing. I finally made it to the lookout. Usually there are other hikers around, but I was completely alone. I scanned the horizon, half hoping to see the shape again, just so I'd know I hadn't imagined it. The wind up there should have been strong. It always is, but it barely moved my hair. I sat down on one of the big flat rocks to eat, but the feeling that I was being watched wouldn't go away. I even glanced behind me a few times toward the trail I'd come from, expecting to see someone walking up. Nothing. Just still trees and that strange bright grass in the clearing below. When I finally headed back down, the woods felt off again. Sounds were missing. No insects, no birds. I didn't notice exactly when the normal wind noises came back, but they did, somewhere near the lower switchbacks. My phone's signal bars stabilized too. It was like crossing back into normal from whatever I'd walked into. At the trailhead, there were 2 other cars besides mine, but no one around. I sat in my car for a while, just staring up at the ridge. I thought about pulling the binoculars out again, but I couldn't make myself do it. I kept thinking if I saw that triangle a second time, I wouldn't be able to talk myself into thinking it was just a trick of the light. When I finally drove off, I checked the sky in my mirrors for most of the way home. I never saw it again. I wasn't planning on going to the party. I work with this guy, Matt Sanders, at a small marketing firm in Portland, and when he invited me over for this casual get-together at his place, I thought about skipping it. It was a Friday night, and honestly, I was tired. But I figured, why not? Maybe it'd be a chance to meet some new people outside the office. The party was small, just a handful of coworkers and some of their friends. Matt's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building in southeast Portland. It had that kind of warm, lived-in feel, with mismatched furniture and plants all over. The kind of place where you feel like you could settle in for a quiet night. The weather outside was chilly, typical early November rain, but inside the place smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet like cinnamon or vanilla. I was standing near the kitchen, nursing a beer, when a guy came up to me. He was maybe mid-30s, clean-cut, dressed in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. He looked kind of familiar, but not someone I'd ever met before. He smiled and said, "Hey, you must be Rachel Lynn Peterson." I blinked. That's my full name, middle name and all. I hadn't even introduced myself properly to anyone, and here he was, saying the exact name I always try to keep to myself in casual settings. "Yeah, that's me," I said cautiously, trying to place him. "Do we know each other?" He shook his head, still smiling like he already knew the answer. "No, we haven't met. I'm Mark. I'm a friend of Matt's." Matt was nowhere near us at the moment, so I figured he was telling the truth. But there was something about the way Mark said my name. It wasn't just the formal way he said it, like someone reading off a list. It was like he'd said it before, several times. Perfectly. Before I could ask why he knew my full name, Mark did something that really threw me off. He asked, "How have you been dealing with that accident you had when you were 7? The one at the lake?" I froze. The accident. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not coworkers, not friends, not even family outside of my parents and sister. I always kept it locked away because it was messy and weird and something I didn't like to talk about. There was no reason for anyone at this party to know. "I'm sorry." "What?" I said, hoping maybe I misheard. Mark's smile didn't falter. "You know, the day you fell through the ice at Silver Creek, your mom almost lost you. That was pretty serious." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. "That was years ago, and, no one here knows about that." He nodded like it was obvious. "Of course, but Matt mentioned it once, and I happened to remember." I glanced over at Matt, who was talking with a couple of other people, looking completely normal. He didn't seem to notice anything strange. "Matt told you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark shrugged. "Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Doesn't matter much." Then, almost casually, he added, "It's a miracle you're still here." The room felt suddenly colder. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself this guy was just weirdly nosy. But the way he looked at me, with those calm, steady eyes that didn't quite blink like a normal person, made my skin crawl. I changed the subject quickly. "So how do you know Matt?" He smiled, but it was different now, like something rehearsed. "Oh, we've known each other a long time. He's a good friend." I nodded, but I could feel the weight of the conversation settling in my chest. I kept glancing back at Mark throughout the night. Every time I caught his eye, he seemed to be studying me, like trying to see something deeper. Later, when I stepped outside for some fresh air, I realized the rain had stopped, but the streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement. I stood there for a few minutes trying to clear my head. When I went back inside, Mark was gone. I asked Matt where he'd gone, and Matt just shrugged like he didn't know anyone by that name. The next day at work, I brought it up casually to Matt. "Hey, who was that guy at your party? Mark something?" Matt looked confused. "Mark? I don't think I invited anyone named Mark. Are you sure?" I described him down to the gray sweater and the way he smiled, but Matt said no one matching that description had been there. I checked with a few coworkers. No one remembered a Mark. I started doubting myself, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the way Mark said my full name, the way he knew about the accident, no one else mentioned, it felt too specific to be coincidence. The strangest part? A few days later, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was just static, but underneath it, I thought I heard a faint voice saying my full name, Rachel Lynn Peterson, over and over, slow and deliberate. I called Matt, but he didn't pick up. No one did. That night, I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call or message. But there was nothing else, just silence. I don't know who that guy was, or how he knew things about me I never told anyone. Sometimes I wonder if I was just tired and imagining things, but the watch on my wrist ticked the same way the old clocks at that flea market did, steady and unchanging. And that feeling of being watched didn't leave me for days. Maybe some things are just too quiet to explain. My phone rang at exactly 3:33 a.m. I don't know why the time sticks in my head so clearly. Maybe because I don't usually get calls in the middle of the night, and this one was weird from the start. I was half asleep, fumbling on the bedside table for the phone. The screen lit up, no caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A calm voice replied. Not unfamiliar, but not someone I could place either. Quiet, smooth, steady. "Do you remember who you really are?" I sat up straight, heart pounding. Who is this? No answer. Just the same calm voice again, repeating, "Do you remember who you really are?" The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long minute, tried calling back, but the number was blocked. That was the start of it. I'm Ethan. I live in a small house just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place where the desert meets the forest and the night sky is so clear you can see every star. I'm a software engineer by day, pretty average life. No one weird, no enemies, no secret past. At least that's what I thought. After that call, I couldn't sleep. The question spun in my head. Who do I really am? I kept thinking about my childhood, my parents, everything I knew about myself. Nothing felt off, but still, something about that voice felt like it knew more than I did. The next few days were strange. I kept getting phone calls, always at odd hours, always the same voice, always just the one question. Do you remember who you really are? No answers, no explanations. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe this? Instead, I started watching myself, paying attention to small details. I noticed weird gaps in my memory. Not the usual forgetfulness, but moments that felt like missing clips in a movie. One afternoon, I went hiking alone up near Kendrick Peak. The weather was cool, a little windy. I usually love that trail, but that day, something felt off. I swear I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, no one was there. The shadows among the trees seemed wrong, like they stretched too far or didn't match the shapes that cast them. I kept thinking about that voice, like it was watching me. It was starting to feel less like a prank call and more like something else. Back home, I checked my phone logs. The calls weren't coming from normal networks, some weird scrambling in the data. I even thought about calling the cops, but there was no threat, just that question, repeated. One night, a week after the first call, I was lying in bed, eyes closed, when the phone buzzed again. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, trying to push the voice out of my head. Suddenly, I noticed something outside my window. A figure standing just beyond the porch light. Tall, slender, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over their face. I didn't recognize the person. When I blinked, they were gone. I told myself it was probably a neighbor or a jogger, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like they were waiting, watching, but not quite human. That same week at work, things got weirder. I'd sit at my desk and for a second, I'd lose track of what I was doing. My coworkers would say I zoned out or looked distracted, but I couldn't explain it. My computer screen would flicker oddly, like static for a moment, and when I'd blink, everything was normal again. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. "Ethan, you okay? You've been off lately." I lied, said I was fine, just tired. On the drive home, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows over the highway. I passed a pickup truck parked by the side of the road. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside. I slowed down and looked back as I passed. For a moment, I thought I saw the same figure from my porch standing in the field nearby. I shook my head, trying to clear it. At home, I started keeping a journal, writing down every odd thing I noticed. The calls, the figure, the glitches in my memory. One night, about 2 weeks after the first call, I got a knock on the door around 1 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. No one there. I opened the door slowly. No one. Just a small folded piece of paper on the doorstep. I picked it up. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Do you remember who you really are?" I dropped the paper and shut the door, my hands shaking. I called my best friend Mark the next morning. Told him everything. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was stressed or maybe losing it. But then I told him about the paper and the figure outside. "Okay, that's weird," he said. "You want me to come over?" He did, and we stayed up all night going through my phone records, the paper, even checking the security footage from my doorbell camera. But the footage showed nothing unusual, no figure, no footsteps. The calls kept coming every few days, always the same voice, always the same question. The paper appeared twice more, each time left in a different place. My mailbox, my car dashboard. One day I started seeing the figure during the day, just at the edge of my vision. When I tried to look directly, they vanished. The way they moved didn't quite feel human. Smooth, deliberate, like someone imitating the way people walk, but not quite getting it right. I stopped going on hikes alone, started locking all my doors and windows, but the calls never stopped. Then, about a month after the first call, something different happened. I was home alone, sitting at the kitchen table when the phone rang again. This time, I answered immediately. "Do you remember who you really are?" the voice asked. Before I could respond, a soft buzzing filled the room. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. I rubbed my arms. Then the voice said something new, almost like a whisper. "You're closer than you think." The line went dead. I sat there, heart racing. After that night, the calls stopped. The figure outside never came back. But I still feel it sometimes, like I'm being watched or followed. And the missing pieces in my memory, they're still there. Every now and then I find myself wondering if maybe I'm not the person I think I am at all. Name's Jesse Martin. I'm from a little town just outside Conroe, Texas, and I've been fishing Lake Livingston since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Uh, it's the kind of place where you know the water, the trees, and every bend in the shore like the back of your hand. Most nights, I'm out there with my old boat, a beat-up bass boat my granddad handed down, and just the sound of the water and crickets for company. That's how I like it. This story starts on one of those quiet late summer nights a few months back. I'd taken the boat out around 9 p.m., figuring the crappie might bite better under the moonlight. The lake was calm, not a ripple, besides what the boat made cutting through the water. The sky was clear, stars spilling everywhere, and the heat of the day had finally eased off to a cool Texas kind of night. I'd set up near an old cypress stand about a mile from the North Shore, one of my favorite spots. I was sitting there, lines in the water, when I noticed something odd out in the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was a boat with a spotlight. There's always folks out there, sometimes fishing late like me. But no, this was different. There were two pale beams of light, parallel, shining straight down from the sky onto the water. They weren't bright or harsh, more like a soft glow that lit up patches of the lake surface, as moving slowly but deliberate-like. They swept side to side, scanning the water back and forth, like someone was looking for something. The beams stayed about the same distance apart, maybe 10 or 15 feet, and moved together perfectly in sync. I swear there wasn't a single sound besides the gentle slap of water on the hull. No boat engines, no motor hum, just those lights. At first, I thought maybe it was a plane with searchlights, but I scanned the sky and didn't see anything. No wings, no flashing navigation lights, nothing. The beams came from way up, so high that I couldn't tell if it was a helicopter or a plane or something else entirely. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I opened the camera, the screen just froze. The phone wouldn't work for a good 30 seconds. Then it started back up, like nothing happened. I checked the photos. Nothing of the beams, like they never showed up at all. The lights kept moving slowly, scanning that patch of lake for what felt like maybe 5 minutes, then they began to fade. First one, then the other, until all that was left was the dark night and the water's quiet surface. I sat there, just staring. The whole thing didn't make sense. After a minute or two, I started the boat and headed back towards shore. But on the way, I felt like something was off, like I was being watched. Though every time I looked around, it was just the lake and trees. Back at the dock, my buddy Ray was waiting. I told him about the lights, but he just shook his head and laughed it off, said maybe it was a reflection from a plane or a truck on the highway. Could be. But I know what I saw, and it didn't fit any normal explanation. That night, when I got home, I checked the news, local social media, anything. No reports of strange lights or planes in the area. Nothing. Since then, I've thought about that night more than a few times. The way those beams moved so precise, like some kind of search. The silence around it all. The frozen phone camera. I don't know if I want to say I saw something out of this world, but I do know it wasn't just a normal light show. Some nights, when I'm out on the lake, I find myself looking up hoping to see those pale beams again. Maybe to figure out what they were looking for. But the lake keeps its secrets, and for now, so do I. I was 2 hours out of San Angelo, cruising the long, flat stretch past the Mesquite Draw when the sky started acting funny. I'd been driving that route 27 times. My brother used to say I could do it with my eyes closed. So when the stars did something I hadn't seen in all those night trips, I noticed. It began subtle. I glanced up to check my bearings. There's not much to see out there but stars and the occasional blinking oil rig, and a few of them seemed to shimmer like heat off a blacktop. Not twinkling, exactly, more like someone had put a thin piece of glass in front of them and was bending the light. When I blinked, the pattern shifted. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been up since before dawn, and Waco had felt like a long way off that morning. Still, there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. A wind came up, warm and dry, and it smelled faintly of metal, ozone, I guessed, from distant storms or some machinery. The radio was playing low, some old Willie Nelson station, when the song stuttered, microsecond hiccups that I thought were the transmission. I reached out and flipped the dial. Static, then nothing. The dash lights were steady, speed steady. It felt small and explainable, bad reception maybe. But then the GPS went black, the little map gone dead mid-route. My phone buzzed like it wanted to call, then nothing. I eased off the accelerator. The road out there is a long ribbon with no shoulders that are worth a damn, so I pulled onto the gravel and let the truck slow. I popped my headlight beams up higher and watched the sky. The stars weren't just shimmering now. They were distorted, like looking through water. I raised my hand, not thinking, and the light from a nearby star seemed to smear around my fingers. The truck hummed under me. I kept the engine idling. I reached for my phone again. The screen was blank. I hit the power button. Blank. The digital clock on the dash stayed stubbornly lit, though. Always had been, a cheap little factory unit, and it showed the right time. That gave me a small comfort more than anything. I told myself my phone needed a charge, that my GPS had glitched, that I was seeing things because I'd skipped too many meals. I was used to fixing things, tuning them, making them run right. I could fix this. Then the truck's electronics started dying one by one. The stereo went dead, the instrument cluster dimmed, then black. The little fan I'd tapped on for the night heat stopped. The engine hiccuped and slowed. I tried the key. Nothing. The truck rolled to a stop like someone had put their hand on the back bumper and cut the push. The only sound left was my breath and that high, thin wind. The world felt oddly immediate and very small. I remember thinking, of all things, about the jackrabbit that used to cross our place outside San Antonio every spring. I wondered absurdly if it was out here, that rabbit, seeing the same sky I was. I was also aware, deep in my bones, that I was alone on a stretch of plain where there aren't many people to look at you twice, and that made my shoulders tighten. It was quiet. The insects had that normal low West Texas hum, but it seemed a step quieter, as if someone had turned their volume down. My chest kept beating loud and my throat felt dry. I opened the door to step out and check under the hood because I'm the kind that looks under a hood when something's wrong, and because movement felt better than sitting with nothing happening. The air out there was cooler, and the smell of metal was clearer, like after a lightning storm, but there wasn't a storm. No drums of thunder. The truck radio's antenna had a light I never looked at. It was dark. I walked a slow circle and found nothing amiss. No people, no lights in the distance other than the stars bent like spoons. 5 minutes, I thought. That's what I told myself I'd wait. 5 minutes, and then I'd call roadside or my sister or somebody. I sat back in the truck and watched the clock on the dash. The digital numbers were stubborn, 3 digits deep and steady. 2:13. I put my head back on the seat and tried to breathe steady. The sky shifted again. The stars rearranged in a small ripple, and the wind dropped to nothing. With the silence, it felt bigger somehow, like the space between my ears had room in it. I kept checking the dashboard, watching those numbers for any sign. 2:14, 2:15. I thought of what a mechanic told me once when my brakes were squealing. An engine is an organ. It needs its rhythm. That phrase echoed dumbly in my head. At 2:18, my phone buzzed across the seat like someone had slapped it awake. I looked down and the screen lit up with an incoming message. "You still there?" From my brother. He'd been half asleep back home and called earlier to make sure I didn't hit the big thunderstorm predicted out by Lubbock. I thumbed at it, and the screen responded like a pet waking up. The GPS came back with a shy beep. The stereo spun its little motor and sought a station. The engine gulped when I turned the key. Everything clicked back on at once, the way a set of lights do when someone flips a breaker. The radio came to life with a smear of a song, the instrument cluster glowed, the clock ticked over like it had not moved. I felt sudden ridiculous relief, which made me feel childish and brittle at once. I drove on, keeping a cautious speed, eyes peeled for the lone bump of something on the horizon that might have caused it. The plane was the plane. Distant pump jacks nodded, a farm light blinked here and there. No glows, no figures. My phone log showed a gap, an absolutely impossible silence. No calls, none. 5 minutes of nothing. The dash clock, annoyingly, had kept marching without pausing. At a gas stop in San Angelo, hands still a little shaky, I told the kid behind the counter that my truck had died out on the draw. He nodded like you'd nod about a busted radiator this summer. Could be a short, he said. We get storms or power flickers. He didn't like to say weird. Folks around here don't speak loud about the things that don't square. Back home that night, my sister and I sat on my mom's porch drinking coffee out of paper cups, watching cottonwoods set like ghosts against the sky. We'd texted each other during the drive, and she told me she'd had a short blackout at the house around the same time, across town. I thought of the stars bending like glass and the dead electronics and how normal my hands looked washing a dish afterwards. I haven't had a sensible, mechanical explanation that fits every piece of it. Why the clock kept time when everything else went dark. Why everything came back exactly 5 minutes later. I know what I felt. Small and watched and oddly quiet. I know the map on my phone blacked out and then returned, like someone had paused my view and then unpaused it. I drive that stretch again sometimes because it's part of the route and part of the day. I keep looking up. Maybe out there nothing will happen but stars and wind and the occasional jackrabbit. Maybe that's all there ever was. But sometimes I catch a shimmer in a star and my fingers go numb for a second, like the truck's key in my palm before the engine starts, waiting to see what the sky will do next. I was working third shift security at a mid-rise office building on Euclid Avenue, right near East 9th. Not the nicest building in the world. Mostly insurance offices, a dentist, and some kind of logistics company that always smelled like printer ink. But it was quiet, and the pay was decent enough for what amounted to sitting behind a desk, making rounds twice a night, and buzzing in the occasional janitor or food delivery. That night, it was a Thursday going into Friday, middle of January. Cold like it gets here, real sharp. Snow hadn't come down heavy, but the sidewalks had that thin, crunchy layer. Not enough for a plow, just enough to slip on if you weren't looking where you stepped. Anyway, around 1:15 a.m., I was sitting behind the desk, eating a gas station turkey sandwich and watching one of those old true crime shows with the volume off, subtitles on. Lights were low. Heat was humming. Pretty normal. I glanced up at the security monitor for the front entrance, standard camera angle pointing out toward the street. You could see the glass of the door, the sidewalk, and then across Euclid, the old 5-story parking garage that hadn't been in regular use since the pandemic. Just sat there mostly empty now, except during games or when people parked for the courthouse. The roof of that garage sits just about even with the 5th floor of my building. I didn't notice it at first, but something caught my eye. A little motion on the roof of the garage, barely there. I figured maybe a bird or a raccoon. But the more I looked, the more I realized it was just sitting there. This dark shape, low to the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall at most. Not big, but it wasn't moving like anything alive either. It just sat there, almost tucked in behind the little concrete guardrail. Could have been a trash bag or a coat, I guess, but something felt wrong, off. Curiosity got the better of me, so I went into the stairwell and climbed up to the 5th floor break room. There's a big window there that looks right across to the garage roof. It was still there, sitting almost center on the roof, about 20 feet back from the edge, black or dark gray. Hard to get a clear shape through the glass, but it wasn't quite square, not round either. Kinda hunched like a crouched person, but a little too still, a little too low. No movement, not even a shiver from wind. I stood there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to twitch or shift or something. Nothing. Then I decided to try my flashlight. I carry one of those big Maglite style ones. Heavy, metal, beam goes a decent distance. I turned off the break room light so the glare wouldn't bounce, cracked the window open, and shined the flashlight across the street. The beam hit it square, and that's when I knew it wasn't any trash bag or bird. The second that light hit it, it reacted. Not fast, not sudden. It didn't jerk or run or flap, it just rose, straight up, like a balloon, but controlled, smooth, almost like it was riding on rails. I stood there completely still, just watching this thing lift, dead quiet, into the sky. It didn't spin or wobble, no rotors, no wings, no thrumming or motor sounds. It just ascended maybe 20-30 feet above the roof. Then it paused. I swear to God it stopped midair and tilted just slightly, like it was looking at me. That's the part that really got to me. That tilt, it wasn't much, but something about it felt deliberate. After that, it kept going, slid upward into the low-hanging clouds and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. I stood there for a lot longer than that, trying to make sense of it. I even shined the flashlight around, like maybe I'd see it on another roof or higher up. Nothing. When I went back down to the lobby, the monitor feed for the front door had frozen, like someone had hit pause. I tapped the screen a few times, switched inputs, nothing. Just a still frame of the sidewalk. It stayed that way for close to 20 minutes before flickering back on by itself. Around 2, the janitor for the 3rd floor came in, Maria, and I didn't say anything to her. I didn't really feel like trying to explain what I'd seen. At 3:20, I did my second round. Nothing unusual inside the building, but when I got to the top floor, I went back to that break room window. The garage roof was empty. But here's the part I don't like to think about too much. On the snow covering that garage roof, there were no prints, no marks, just clean, unbroken white. Except for one thing, right in the center where that thing had been, there was a perfect round patch of bare concrete, maybe 3 feet across, like the snow had been melted or pushed away, but no pileup around the edge. Just gone. No dripping, no scatter, no disturbance, just a circle of clean roof. I watched that patch for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, until I started feeling dumb and cold. Nothing else happened that shift, or the next one. 2 days later, the patch was gone. Snow had come again, and it was all covered. I never saw anything like that again, but I did start noticing a few odd things after that. Random power flickers in the cameras, just for a second or two, and never consistent. A hum in the elevator that didn't used to be there, like a high-pitched tone just at the edge of hearing. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, I still glance at that rooftop from the break room. Not because I think it's coming back. I don't know what I think. I just can't stop looking. I was out on the Ohio River near Cincinnati, just past dusk, when I noticed something weird that's been bugging me ever since. I'm Mike Turner, by the way, a regular guy who spends a lot of time fishing around the river. Been doing it for years, mostly at spots I know well. That night, I was near the California neighborhood, right where the water gets a little slower and darker under those old bridges. Perfect for catfish or the occasional bass. I'd launched my little John boat a couple hours before sundown. Nothing special, just me, my gear, and a couple of beers stashed in a cooler. The river was calm, the sky mostly clear with a few clouds hanging low, and the usual sounds of the city drifting from downtown. I had my rod set up on the side, and I was just relaxing, waiting for a bite. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught something strange on the water. At first, I thought it was just reflections from one of the barges that sometimes float by at night. But these lights didn't match any boat lights I'd ever seen. They were faint, kind of bluish and greenish, almost like old fishing lures glowing beneath the surface. The odd part was the way they moved. Instead of drifting like a boat or floating debris, the lights seemed to shift slowly, like they were part of some shape that was twisting just under the water. It wasn't a solid shape, more like a ripple of light that changed patterns, but stayed roughly in the same spot, maybe 20 feet from the boat. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it at the spot where the lights were. As soon as the beam hit the water, the lights vanished like someone flipped a switch. I thought maybe it was some kind of underwater reflection, so I flicked the light on and off a couple times, but Each time, again, the lights came back when the beam moved away, only to disappear again when I shined it directly at them. I checked around for other boats, but there was nothing. No sounds, no running engines, no flashing red or green navigation lights. The usual river traffic had slowed down, probably because it was getting late. Even the barges seemed to have stopped moving by then. Just me and the river. I started feeling a little uneasy, not gonna lie. The river's always had its mysteries, but I've never seen anything like this. I wanted to get a better look, so I grabbed the small net we keep in the boat and dipped it into the water near where the lights showed up. No splash, no resistance, just normal river water. That's when I noticed the water temperature felt off. Not cold like usual at night, but kind of warmer in that exact spot. I mean, the river is wide and deep, so small warm patches aren't unheard of, but it felt strange, like something was shifting under the surface, but I couldn't see any movement or hear anything. I put the flashlight down and just sat there for a while, watching. The lights came back, those faint, pulsing colors, shifting in patterns that almost looked deliberate, like someone tracing shapes underwater with a glow stick. I kept thinking I might be dreaming or half asleep, but I was wide awake. After a few minutes, I thought I saw something else, a faint ripple, like a shadow, moving just beneath where the lights were. Not a fish or a log, something more fluid. I blinked and it was gone. I reached for my phone to check the time and maybe call my buddy, but the signal was dead. Typical around there late at night. No worries. I figured I'd just keep an eye on things and head back to the dock soon. That's when the humming started. It wasn't loud, more like a low vibration that filled the air and the water itself. Not like a motor or anything mechanical, more like a tone you feel more than hear. It mixed with the soft rustling of the river against the boat. I felt a tickle on the back of my neck and looked around, but the riverbank was dark, the trees still and silent. No other boats, no animals, just that humming and the shifting lights below. I tried to shake off the feeling and decided to reel in and get ready to head back. As I started moving the boat, the lights vanished completely as if someone pulled them under or turned them off. The humming faded with them. I glanced back once more before I cut the engine. The river was just dark, quiet, and normal again. On the ride home, my radio kept cutting out, static and faint voices I couldn't make sense of, like snippets of a conversation far away, but no stations were supposed to be on at that time. My GPS blinked a couple times, showing my location jumping a few feet here and there, like signal interference. Once I got home, I looked over my gear, trying to find some logical explanation. No weird reflections, no equipment malfunction, just that feeling, like the river had shown me something I wasn't meant to see. I haven't told many folks about it. Around here, people either laugh or start spinning stories about river monsters or ghosts, and I'm not into that. I don't know what those lights were or why they appeared the way they did, but they weren't normal boat lights, and they weren't anything I can explain. The river's been quiet since, but every now and then, when the night's calm and the water's glassy, I swear I catch a glimpse of something glowing just beneath the surface, shifting and pulsing like a slow heartbeat. And I wonder if it's still down there, waiting. Name's Jake Mallory. I've been running snowmobiles across the tundra around Bethel for a good chunk of my life, hauling gear, checking traps, that sort of thing. Nothing fancy, just the usual work that keeps folks going through those long winters. I'm not one for stories or tall tales, but what happened last January still sits with me, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. It was a clear night, bone cold, probably 20 below. The kind where the stars burn sharp and the air snaps in your lungs like glass. I was coming back from a run near the Kuskokwim River, cutting across the flat tundra to shave off some time. The snow was hard-packed from the freeze, perfect for riding fast, and I was making good time under the glow of the moon. I'd been watching the sky a bit that night, more out of habit than anything. Up there, past the usual constellations, the stars looked endless. That's when I noticed something strange on the horizon, a cluster of lights, bright but not like any plane or helicopter I'd ever seen. They were blinking in a way that seemed deliberate, almost mechanical, and arranged in a precise shape, like a perfect triangle, but with smaller points inside, almost like a grid. I'm not good with geometry, but it was too perfect to be random. I slowed down to get a better look, heart thumping. The lights didn't move or make a sound, just hovered silently, steady as a rock against the cold night sky. The snowmobile's engine was the only noise, and even that felt distant, like the world had muffled everything else around me. I pulled my phone out, figuring I'd try to get a photo, not that I expected much in the dark with my old camera. As I aimed, the lights vanished in an instant. Just like that. No fade, no blink off, nothing. Gone. The sky was empty, just stars again. I sat there on the sled, blinking. No lights, no noise, nothing but the cold biting at my face and the wind whispering over the snow. Then I caught it, a faint smell, something sharp and electric, like ozone mixed with burnt wood or scorched earth. I looked around, but the ground was frozen solid, no scorch marks, no smoke, just the usual tundra. I didn't know what to make of it. The smell hung in the air for a moment, then faded with the wind. I started the snowmobile again and headed back slow, looking over my shoulder every now and then, half expecting to see those lights come back. They didn't. The next few days, I kept thinking about what I'd seen. When I told a couple of friends at the general store in Bethel, they laughed it off. Probably some military drills, one said. Another guessed it was just satellites or airplanes. Maybe. But none of that explained the smell or how fast the lights disappeared. No commercial planes fly slow and silent like that, especially not in that pattern. On my way out for another run a few nights later, I took a different route to check for any signs on the ground near where the lights had been. Snow was untouched, no tracks or burns. The only thing different was the way the air felt, thicker, heavier, like the cold had weight to it. I kept looking for any flicker or glow, but the sky was just normal stars and moonlight. That night, as I headed home, I noticed the radio on my sled was acting up, static popping in and out, cutting through my favorite station. At one point, I swear I heard a faint pulse, almost like a Morse code, but it didn't make any sense. I figured maybe the cold was messing with the electronics. After that, things got stranger. On a couple of rides, I'd get this feeling like I was being watched, not by people or animals, but something else. When I stopped to check the engine or tie down gear, I'd glance around, but nothing was there. Just the endless white tundra and the frozen horizon. One night, I caught a flicker of movement out there, just beyond the tree line where the river bends, a glint of light that wasn't fire or flashlight. It was like something reflecting the moon but moving too smoothly, almost floating. I tightened my jacket and kept going, heart in my throat. After that, I started carrying a little extra gear, a flare gun, a handheld GPS, even a small digital recorder, just in case. Nothing showed up on the recorder, though. No voices, no strange sounds, just my own breathing and the snowmobile's hum. Weeks passed with no new sightings. The weather turned warmer, snow softened, and the tundra started to thaw. The weird smells and the humming vanished. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets out there. Still, sometimes when I'm alone out on the snow, especially on a quiet, clear night, I swear I see a flicker of blinking lights on the horizon. Never the same pattern twice, just a glimpse before they vanish. And sometimes that smell comes back on the wind, faint and electric. I don't know what it was or if anyone else will ever see it. But out there, under the endless Alaskan sky, some things don't quite fit the rules. And sometimes you catch a glimpse of them just before they disappear.